Welcome back to I Love You Tea with Trashellie, not sponsored by Yui Hirahara. I'm Elle,
And I'm Ashley.
and this is a little podcast that we record in our Discord server about the I Love You comic and upload to YouTube and Spotify.
Yay, Spotify.
So today we are going to be tackling a topic that we've been saying for weeks that we need to devote an episode to, that we've kind of talked around and, hinted a little bit at in past episodes where necessary, but have avoided delving into in the interest of this episode. So this is the Yui episode.
The woman, the myth, the legend herself, the root of all evil, trauma, and in general, badness.
So we're going to kind of be talking about who we think Yui is, what her past might have been like, what her motivations are, how she is in the story, how she came to be this way, and just generally Yui, how and who she is.
Right. Especially because obviously she's one of those who her story has not been very explored yet. So there's a lot of speculation about why is she the way she is and how it's led to a lot of things like, is Yui a sociopath? Is she a psychopath? What is it that has driven her to be the kind of person she is? Why does she harm people? What is driving her? I remember how obviously when we go back to some of our earlier topics about, like first impressions, subversions, how Yui was introduced to us as potentially being like a scorned lover. Is she potentially treating Nol the way she is because, oh, he's the son of her husband's mistress? But obviously, the more we get into I Love You, the more we start to see of Yui, the family dynamics, the more we start to see that clearly that wasn't really the case. But I think Yui is one of those characters who you really have to read a lot into her to really start to get an idea of who she is. And I think she's one of the most, I'm going to say, subtextually told characters at this point. I'm not sure if I'm actually saying that quite with the way that I mean, but what I mean is there's a lot about her that I think so far is merely speculation. But I know you and I have a lot of agreement on what we think about her and, what we think probably her past is like and how she became who she is.
Yeah, and so the kind of baseline element to analyzing who is Yui, how did she become Yui, is the fact that she is Yui Hirahara. She was born into the Hirahara family, that's where she came from, and especially in I Love You, characters all carry around the implications of their early family and their family dynamics. So the Hirahara family, from what we gather from the way that they're talked about, the limited interaction that we've had with other members of the Hirahara family, the way that Yui talks about how their family is structured, the pressure on Kosuke's, where Yui is at this point in her life, the articles that Yujing has, is likely a very long-standing family. And this kind of, built through generations, corporate family, likely very kind of like that kind of like cutthroat, like get to the top, or like get to the top, stay on top kind of family with a lot of, I guess, like traditionalist structure and expectations, and probably not a lot of love. I often liken the way that I think the Hirahara family operates to like old time royal families, where like they have this status, their whole family is about this institution that they have built. And, there's that inherent element of striving to be the best, of this expectation of success, of this coldness, and of this kind of rivalry and like family expectations and hierarchy.
Right. And we can see that in the way she treats Kosuke and the way she talks to him when, she says a lot of things like, we're not like other people, we're not like other families. He's told from a very young age to not expect to be treated like other kids, that he shouldn't anticipate the way kids are treated by their parents because they're not going to treat him that way. Her parents didn't treat her that way, probably. Their parents probably didn't treat them that way. I also think in that same way of royalty, especially when you have these hierarchical families where what you're really passing down is that lineage, this concept of like it's the money, the fortune, the company, etc. This isn't about family, it's about you know this longevity of the company. um and so, right, like you see this reinforced in how she treats Kosuke. It's probably an echo of the way that she was treated by her own family. I think this is something really important to keep in mind about Yui is that, she wasn't really something that just spawned. She was created. Like, we say this about all characters that they are the products of their environments, of their circumstances, and Yui is no different. She had to have been raised a certain way. Her mindset came from somewhere. Her mentality was instilled at some point in time, and your family structures, your family treatment very often provides that kind of foundation. And I think the way that she treats and speaks to Kosuke definitely lends a lot of idea about this is what their family is. And that's kind of like why you can kind of see that concept of, oh, she loves Kosuke, and as you start to come away and start to realize, oh, it's never really been about love after all, and how you can really start to see that it really has always been about not so much about nurturing him as much as ensuring that he is going to be the best person to carry on the name. And that's probably something that her parents did with them.
And like when talking about the way that we can that we can glean about the Hirahara family at large through Kosuke, the first thing is kind of this idea that Yui's always telling him that, like you said, we're not like other families. This is how things are for us. And she's always framing it around the family business, around the family lineage, around, we're cold, but that's just how it is. We have more important things to be concerned about. Love isn't really the normal way that people love each other, isn't how we love each other. And Kosuke doesn't at any point question this within his own family. We see him have cognitive dissonance about it when he looks at other families, like this is part of his internalized issues with Nolan Nessa. This is part of his issues with people as a whole. This is why Shin-Ae getting the rice cakes for her dad hits home with him. But within his own family, he doesn't seem to have a question about it, which indicates that the extended family is reflecting this dynamic that Yui has told Kosuke about. That from what he can see, that is how all of them are operating. And if the extended family isn't creating a contradiction for Kosuke of the narrative that Yui's instilling, then it indicates that that is very likely the kind of upbringing that Yui was in herself, and where she got that idea of family that she passed down to Kosuke from. In like and like with with one of her other big instillments in Kosuke about the nature of Rand, we know that internally Rand is not the way that she describes, but externally the way that he treats Kosuke was easily in line with what Yui said, and that's why he never questioned that idea of his father until Nol rolled around, because what Yui is telling him is in line with the world that he sees. Yeah, and like I think one of the so there's a lot of things that we know about, that we think about Yui aren't things that we know about Yui, but there are a couple of things that we do know about her. One is that she is the youngest sibling. One is that it was confirmed that she was denied power in the company for being a woman, that she has to be the smartest person in the room, and that she hates men. So those are the few things that we do know about Yui. And so when we have a family structure that is built so much around this inheritance and this kind of like traditionalist, like old royal family type inheritance, and you're the youngest sibling and you're a woman,
Mhm.
and we know that she was denied power in the company for being a woman, and we know that in these kind of structures, and we see it through Kosuke as well, originally because he is the older brother and the legitimate brother, that it follows birth order. So she is at the bottom of the totem pole. And this means that like but yeah. Yeah, those are things that we know because Kimchi has said them not in the comic. So that's yeah, it's bringing in some out of comic information. Yeah, but if we I feel like the Hirahara family just always like really makes the most sense to me when I think about them in terms of a royal family. Where
Mhm.
like
And I think we're supposed to, like,
yeah,
especially I think a lot of families like this, like, I always hearken them to a chaebol family, and, like, if you watch Korean K-dramas, you know what that is. And, like, basically, your elite families are basically always modeled after those royal families. That concept of hierarchies and lineage tend to, follow that anyway.
yes, exactly. And like, you don't get decades of like generations worth of this kind of like callous and calculated and at times like violent behavior without it again being generational, without it being instilled in you. And so like oftentimes when people talk about Yui, they'll bring up that like she, like you said, like that she spawned this way, she was probably always horrible, and the core of her personality might have always been there. But we see that those similar traits in, for example, someone like Yujing, but she's not anywhere near what Yui is, which indicates that in Yui that was nurtured in a specific way. In kind of the same way where like if you're the youngest child in a royal family, how many times do we have those youngest children doing whatever it takes to get
Right.
up to the top, to get above the other people, and having that kind of like
What is the term for, like, siblings murdering each other?
I don't know. I was just
I can't
gonna call it
remember it.
sibling rivalry and violence. Um,
Sorry.
but yeah, but it's that kind of concept of like there's a finite amount of resources, and they're being sibicide. No, but there's this finite amount of resources, and they're being raised their whole lives with this resource being so incredibly important, this family lineage, and told that only one of them can have it. You know, so they're going to view their whole life very likely around either explicitly around that or around explicitly not wanting that.
Mhm.
Um, and so Yui likely was raised in that kind of family where that kind of like callous cutthroat behavior is promoted because you don't get to where they are without that. You don't get to a lineage that lasts for generations without that, as well as that importance on, you need to earn this family role, except for the oldest, it's yours. Um,
Right.
but everyone else, you need to prove yourself or you need to find another way to benefit the family because we're not going to give that to you. That belongs to them because this is the way that the family works. So there's
Right.
like all of that pressure in addition to all those obstacles, and that like just it's just a very specific dynamic that these people would be raised their whole lives within.
And that's, like, without even getting into the patriarchy aspects of it, like, just being the youngest member of that family and what it means to know that there is nothing that there will be nothing for you if you don't fight and take everything from them.
Yeah,
Um,
that
that
your backup.
Right. That concept that these people are not your family, they're not your relatives, they are your rivals. There is no concept of, like, that nurturing that, camaraderie. It is you either destroy them because they will destroy you if you don't do it first. Because, right, like if you're the heir, like they are all going to be out to get you. So it's your job to ensure that you're going to maintain your spot. And then likewise, it's your role or your job to steal it from them. So, it's very survival of the fittest, essentially. And again, it comes back to that point that if she was the youngest, what did she do to get that spot? And we're kind of shown a small glimpse of it with Hansuke and how he talked about how despite how well he was doing in school, it was so hard for him to get a job, wasn't it? And it's
And
like, gee, I wonder what could possibly have interfered with his ability to get a job.
And even more so, like we barely have any real references to Hansuke's mother, but when she is talked about, it's mentioned how, she stepped down and, oh, Yui is so sad. Her sister doesn't talk to her anymore. And is she doing better than she was last time I saw her? Like this
Mhm.
indication that Yui did something to encourage her sister to come out of the race, because they were competition. They weren't siblings, they were rivals. And Yui wasn't going to live her life being the final backup in the line.
Right. I think fandom kind of has this mentality that Hansuke's mother must be, you know, nothing like Yui just because she isn't a part of all of that. And, like he referred to it as like she made the choice to step down and how relieved he is. But I feel like, I think there's probably a lot more to it that we just obviously aren't shown because it's something that has already happened. But the idea that she had to step down means that at one point, she probably, well, more likely her husband, but we'll get to that. She probably was the one who was at some point above Yui in that, hierarchical rung.
Yeah, and like,
Um, oh, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, and as we kind of mentioned, like, there is this, like, Yui is the one who did get to the top. There's this indication that she fought harder than everyone else, because she she won the race. Um, so like, was she potentially like was she potentially kind of more ruthless than her siblings, more dedicated than they were, more driven than they were? Most likely. But
But it doesn't mean
like,
they weren't any of
yeah,
that.
it doesn't mean they weren't. And so much of so much of how she would have fostered that degree of ruthlessness and drive was by being born into this world where she knew that she was essentially going to have to plow through all of her siblings if she wanted to get anything.
Right. Um, and I do think that there's something really interesting about how we look at it, where, like Kosuke's always been considered the heir, whereas Hansuke is older than him. So it does make me wonder, like timeline wise, about how and when everything happened. Considering that from a very, very young age, Kosuke's been told, like, you're the heir, you're going to be the heir, you're going to, take Rand's position and you're gonna like overtake him and stuff. Um, like Hansuke was never really raised with that mentality, and it clearly shows in like how he just has like this much more lax personality and mindset than Kosuke. So it does make me wonder, like timeline wise, when and how all of that happened. That's a totally different point. Like we already have a long list of things, but it does make me wonder things like that.
I This ties again, like, this is ahead because it would go more in with the patriarchy section, but I get the impression that Hansuke's mother marrying Hansuke's father was probably kind of the final straw that pushed her out of the race. So
True,
I
yeah.
assume that she stepped down relatively shortly before Hansuke was born, and he would have just narrowly escaped that. But like you said, that means that, like, Kosuke has been raised his entire life with the view of you're the heir, and he started his life with the view of you're the sole heir, and he's still so paranoid about it, and so it's so easy to pigeonhole him into this drive of you have to do this. And
Mhm.
he gets this little bit of taste of it might get taken away from you when Nol arrives. And for all intents and purposes, there's no reason why Nol should be able to take it away from him. And he's still, he draws upon those same kind of ruthless, driven, callous traits. Not anywhere to the degree of Yui, because I think it's a little bit less natural for Kosuke.
Right.
He has less to fight through, but he still draws upon those things, even with just that fear of there's another potential heir out there. Meanwhile, again, like coming back to this, Yui was the youngest. She was not entitled to anything unless she fought through everyone to get it.
But it also shows like how, like how much she normalized it too, to such a degree that it's taken Kosuke this long for him to step back and really realize this wasn't normal. Like,
Yes.
like even though like he's always justified it in his mind that we're not like other people. And, this is something that we will touch on a little again later. Is like, we're not like other people. This is our normal. But like, he's finally able to step back and go, like, we may not be like other people, but does that make all of this okay? Like, he's able to finally get to that point where he can say, is it okay for me to skew these morals like this? Whereas, like, we know that Yui has never been able to do that because as the youngest, there was never room for it. If you wanted to be at the top, you had to. It was either you destroy everyone or you're going to get destroyed. And we know that again, that is a running theme in her life, not just within her own family, but within society in general. But this is probably where it largely took root and largely where it grew from.
Yeah. And so like in addition to just that inherent nature of all of this, being born the youngest, being born in this kind of, royal type inheritance conglomerate family, already instilling all of those values and that kind of, you have to destroy or be destroyed, and you have to fight tooth and nail for anything that you deserve because of the order in which that you were born with, because of the way that you were born. The other half of that is that in addition to being born the youngest, she was, as we mentioned, also born a woman. And we do have the explicit confirmation from Kimchi off comic that she was denied power in the company for being a woman. So we know that one of the foundations of her life is this kind of battle with the patriarchy for what she wants and what she is deserved and what she literally just can't have because of the circumstances of the way that she was born.
Mhm. And like talking about that, the family structure and stuff, it makes you wonder, is she the only woman in her family who has felt this way? We don't know a lot about her sisters. We've barely begun to even meet her family at all, like her parents. So we've kind of been theorizing whether or not her mother has in, started to step into the story or not. But something that Elle and I have talked a lot about is, does her mother have this same mentality as Yui? Because again, it kind of is like, who who helped shape the mentality that Yui carries? Who helped give her the mindset and, like nurtured this outlook that she has? Like what is the possibility that her mother is someone very much like herself who has kind of been relegated to this, the position of the mommy housemaker role, as I like to refer to it, where that kind of resentment for being somebody who is denied the power that you want or being denied any other role that you might want simply because you're born a woman. And like Elle said, like she's the youngest of what was it, four girls? The
I don't
youngest?
remember the exact number, but she was the youngest.
Okay. I don't know why my brain always wants to say four. But
I
yeah,
like
to be the
I get
youngest,
it confused with the Kims a lot.
that I was thinking about that too. But at any rate, to be the youngest, you're all girls. And the fact that we have to assume that her sister probably had at least some bit of the same ruthlessness of her. It makes you wonder, was her mother fostering this? Because if we are going to talk about the patriarchy, then we're going to assume that, and this is all speculation, of course, but a father isn't necessarily going to be instilling this mindset in his daughters, right? Like he's going to care more about who they're marrying because that's who's going to be carrying the name, right? But mother, she's going to care more because she understands the plight of the daughter who's going to be feeling like a prisoner trapped in this marriage, in this role. Somebody who is so close to being the heir, but isn't actually. I'm personally very, very fascinated with the idea of her mother, like who she could be. I mean, like she could very much be somebody who's more like Alyssa's mom, who's like, more of that feeble woman who's just kind of like in that role because this is who she's, the role that she was given. But the idea of like Yui being made in the likeness of her mother is something that like is so fascinating to me. I love the idea so much.
And I think this is kind of supported by something he said about not Yui's mother, but if Kosuke had been a girl. Somebody asked if Yui would have treated Kosuke the same if she was a girl. And Kimchi was like, no, she would have been significantly harder on the girl,
Yes.
but she knows how it is for the daughters. And so this
Yes.
like kind of supports the idea that I guess regardless of what her mother was actually like, but that Yui saw the fate that her mother had or the life that her mother lived and modeled herself after how she didn't want to be a victim of the patriarchy, regardless of exactly what it was that her mother looked like. Um, that is likely a strong element of where this came from because Yui, as stated, if she had a daughter, would be pushing her daughter to be able to get farther along in this fight against the patriarchy than she did and being harder on her so that she's prepared to do so. It like not to be I guess like kind of corny, but it reminds me of the line in the Barbie movie where she's like, "Mother, stand still so that the daughters can run." Where it's like Yui can only get so far because she only has
Mhm.
much life to live to fight her way through this like deeply ingrained patriarchal structure. But she does all of this fighting and then she pushes a daughter to do more fighting. And then eventually, generations later, maybe it's broken. And so I do think it's likely that either that started before Yui and that is a mindset that her mother instilled in her and is part of why she's so harsh, or that if her mother is like Alyssa's mother, that Yui saw kind of that long-term vision of, I don't want to be pigeonholed into that and I'm going to need to fight through it, which ties into the idea that if she had a daughter, because Yui, she's on a multi-generational agenda, right? We kind of
Mhm.
we get this through her treatment of Kosuke already. But that if she had a daughter, it'd be like, I fought so hard to break through this, these like horrible, insidious men who put us down, and you're going to go farther than I could in my time.
Right. Like I feel like it's a really interesting thing because on the one hand, there's a clear resentment. Like Yui clearly resents raising a son because he represents so much of what she hates. And again, we're going to get to this. But I think she would also kind of resent raising a daughter. Not that she would resent her daughter, but she would resent, that act of it, like having to fight against that because, it would be a double fight. Like she's
Yeah.
doing it for herself and for her daughter now.
And
And it
like
would make I can see why it would make her so much worse. Like because now it's not just her fight, it's that fight for her daughter. And yeah, it's just yeah, ooh.
and at the end of the day, it's still not Yui who gets the life
Mhm.
wanted.
Right? And again, like you can't entirely blame her for that resentment because like the effort that you're putting out to fight that battle for her, to help her, and in the end, she's the one who's going to reap things. She's going to reap those benefits that you never could. Like,
And
I
just
know, like, Yui is so universally hated, and rightfully so, but, like, on some level, you have to understand her resentment, and, like, to some degree, you can't deny that she had, like, some of her resentment is so justified. Not like her actions are justified, but like the resentment she carries, you can't blame her for that.
like when you like look at it in her shoes, she's born into this structure which is inherently, it shapes you in a certain way and it's kind of suffocating, and she's born at the very bottom of it. She's born the youngest child, she's born a woman. She, as we've seen, can run circles around all these other people, but
Mhm.
no matter how much she does, she's never going to get back what she put in. No matter what she is striving for and the life that she wants, they're never going to let her have it. She can earn it and she still won't get it. And even more than that, she has to be this person who is so opposite to what she wanted. Like in this
Mhm.
vein of her, being put down because she was a woman and being denied things, she also has to play into that extremely like feminine host mommy homemaker persona because that is what's expected of her, and she has to manipulate their expectation of her in order to get anything. But we see that, when Yui is on her own, she's in these power poses, she's got her short hair, she has like a very kind of traditionally masculine energy around her, and she seems authentic and confident and like she's enjoying herself in a way that she never truly does when she's wearing the wig and she's wearing the mommy homemaker mask, because she is a driven businesswoman and she resents the way that the patriarchy has put her down and the family structure that she was born into has put her down, and the limitations imposed on her and expectations put on her in a way that genuinely, if she were born a man, would probably none of it have happened that way. She probably genuinely would have been easily able to get the life that she wanted to live, but just because of the way that she was looked at by the people around her and the circumstances of her birth that she couldn't control, she had this vision of a life that she wanted and the things that she wanted and the things that she felt were important. And for probably her entire life, but especially her early life, was just constantly given this message of you're not allowed to have it. It doesn't matter what you do, you will not be allowed to have it. And that genuinely is something that would foster so much resentment in somebody. And then especially as you watch other people get it, people who aren't as deserving of it as you, people who didn't put in the amount of effort, people who don't want it as much, just because they were born in those circumstances that you weren't. There would be so much resentment and anger. And like where she has channeled it is, as we said, not great, It's the understatement of the year, but not great. But the source of that anger and resentment, the fact that she feels it, is like so very understandable and normal to feel that
Right.
with what she has likely experienced in her early life.
I feel like the patriarchy is ultimately Yui's undoing. Because we could examine Yui and the Hirahara family and their family structure, and we could say, you know what, it's true, they are unlike other families. We argue that they foster very unhealthy family dynamics? Absolutely. But, you know, under any other circumstances, had it not been for the patriarchy, Yui ruthlessly, in a cutthroat manner, destroying her family ties so that she, the youngest of them, could be, the king of them all, and destroying all of them so that she could be the keeper of all the riches. No, it would be like, yep, that checks out. That makes sense. But like you said, like the real issue is that Yui is the one who's running circles around so many people. She has proven that she is cunning, that she is clever, that she is more often than not like 3, 5, 10 steps ahead of everybody else. Is she using her intelligence and cleverness for good things? No. But the point is, she proves herself over and over and over. And, a lot of the issue is because she was denied these things, she has channeled them in these ways. It's one of, Elle and I love to talk so much about unmet needs. And, this is clearly one of those things. Yui has been denied something simply because of who she was born as. Like solely because she was born as a woman, she stood no chance, no matter what she did, no matter how much she proved herself, no matter how she proved how much more competent she is than all of these people. Like you can see the derision in the way that she handles Song Chul. And like how, like I will say a Song Chul, he is clearly an intelligent character, but like he's also like he doesn't really make effort. He is lazy. And like he's one of those characters who will so be given things because he's a man. He may be the youngest in his family, but because he's a man, he is still going to be given more things than Yui was given. Like Yui wasn't given things. She had to fight for things. She had to claw for things. She had to destroy for things. And like, like Elle said, like that, on some level, that resentment is so justified. But the problem is because she was denied that, she channels it in a way where she's taking it out on everyone. Because, it's like if she can't have it, she's going to destroy everyone. And, in some ways, kind of like, I'm going to prove to you how wrong you guys were. And it's
Or-
kind of like, oh well, she's doing a good job proving them wrong, isn't she?
and like, but yeah, she, like you said, she has a vendetta against basically the whole world. And it's like, if, like, just think about for a second, if Yui was born a man, even if she was still born the youngest in her family, she would have only had to fight through her siblings. It theoretically would have stopped there when she got to the top, because as soon as she is the most fit man in the family, everything goes to her. And life is, smooth sailing, easy ride from there on out. But that's not how it went for her, because she had to fight through everyone. And then it still wasn't enough because she has to be tied to a man in order to have anything. So, she has to marry Rand. She has to set up this Mukuyoshi relationship where he is now the son and she's the wife of the son. And she has things by proxy. And now she has to come and try to figure out how to cast him out. And that's just so much more resentment on top of it. But, it just creates this ongoing game of it never stops for her. It never ends for her. And then with that being based in her gender, you know, everyone in the world has a gender, and for the most part, Yui is going to be thinking about things fairly binary. So she's going to be thinking about men and women, and that means that all of the men are these horrible people who are part of the patriarchal system that put her down and denied her things, and they get anything that they want without a fraction of the effort that she put in, without having to prove themselves. And it's disgusting to watch them just get handed these things that she has to run circles and prove herself over and over again to earn. And then on the flip side, there's the women, where it's like that kind of like she often indicates how much she sees herself or doesn't see herself in other women. And this kind of like we talked about earlier about Yui viewing things as destroy or be destroyed because of the way that that early family structure was. But also, that's how things went for her. She weaponized that trauma that she had and destroyed, and her siblings didn't and became destroyed. And that was just proven for her. And it's likely been proven for her over and over again in this family. So with women being kind of consistently put down in her worldview. They're either going to be strong women who can learn to wield the sword and either be raised up to be powerful alongside her or are competition for her and have to be put in their place, or they're weak and they're contributing and they deserve whatever happens to them because they weren't strong enough to take what was theirs in this world that's putting them down. So it really, just the nature of this being so patriarchal creates this lifelong vendetta against basically everyone in the world by proxy, because in her mind, they all fit into this patriarchal system somewhere, and that is the system that has traumatized her and put her down and made her life the way that it is. Therefore everyone is guilty by proxy.
Right. And even within that gender binary, like you said, Yui herself, when she's on her own, she does show a lot more of what we would consider a more masculine energy. But when she's in the public face, she is forced to play a more feminine role. Um, and while I do believe that she's definitely weaponized this in a manner to kind of downplay herself, especially to disarm others so that they will think less of her, so that they won't suspect her in order to, kind of, how am I trying to say this? Basically, so that to make herself more unassuming so that people don't see her for what she is. But she is still being forced to play a role that she doesn't want to play. This is both as, playing mommy housemaker, but in general, like you said, when we see her on her own, she isn't really playing into that feminine image. She keeps her hair cut short. She enjoys, you know, shedding that image of herself. And, have that is a form of trauma. Like, even without getting into things like gender dysmorphia and stuff, just being forced to play a role, to wear an image that you're not comfortable in, just because it pleases others, because this is what's expected of you, because you're a woman and this is what you're supposed to do, like that in and of itself is a kind of trauma.
And it's
And like, honestly, this is why I all of those wig jokes don't land with me, because Yui's wig isn't, like, the wig isn't for her, it's for others. Like, I don't think she is ashamed of who she is without the makeup, without the wig, without any of that. If she could, that's how she would walk around. But society won't permit it. The patriarchy won't permit it. She's not allowed to be who she truly wants to be, both in her career, in her image, in, all of her deepest desires. And that is tragic. That is traumatic for her.
and just like basically all of her trauma comes back to that root of not being allowed to be who she authentically wants to be. Where she like you said, she's always being forced into the roles that other people want her to play, that she has to then manipulate and be ruthless and cunning within those roles to try to get anywhere near what she actually wants. And she's not, like, theoretically in the system, not ever actually truly going to be able to live as that authentic self in life that she wants, because she will always have to play some sort of a role to have it. She will always have to be running around. She doesn't have enough lifetime to live to dismantle these structures, to not have to do that. And like that is just a lifelong trauma where she's always going to be forced something and is always going to be resenting some aspect of that. And once again, like, it doesn't make the things that she's done better, you know? Like
Right.
like I said, she's dragged the whole world into this revenge arc for herself, because that's what it is. It's a revenge arc and it's a vendetta, and it's getting what she deserves by whatever means the world is going to force her to use, essentially. But while she sees the entire world as part of this game, because as mentioned, everyone's participating in society and the patriarchy somehow, which means that they're all guilty by association. That,
Well, it doesn't justify things. It does
yeah,
make it easy to understand why she's like this.
yeah,
Like I think the thing about Yui that makes her such a fantastic antagonist is that she makes sense. Like, she is awful, but you understand why she's awful. Like, once we sit down and we think about her and we think about her roots and how she ended up like this, we kind of sit here and go like, damn, it makes sense. And I'm going to say something now, and I'm going to make a note because I know we can connect this to something in our notes. But if you think about Noel right now, he is a person who has never really been allowed to live as his authentic self either, because he feels like he's been punished forever. And everybody has been rooting so hard for Noel to get his revenge arc and for him to, like have his anti-hero, moment. But like, what separates Noel and Yui? Like, I mean, obviously, like, let me preface this because, like, clearly what separates it is obviously that, like, Noel is not going out and harming innocent people. But what I'm getting at is
it's the score.
Yui's, right, like, Yui's revenge, like you said, this is Yui's revenge arc. Like, she has been so deeply wronged that she's taking it out on everyone. And we're kind of watching Noel, and he is at that point where it's like he could go that direction. Will he? I don't think so. I think, that is what separates him and Yui. But, you know, there is that kind of parallel there. Obviously, I don't think he's going to follow Yui. I don't think he's going in that actual direction. But yeah, that parallel is there. And it's that thing where it's like, but you've got to kind of sit there and look at them from their roots. Obviously, Yui has taken this out so much further. Like, are there people who, Yui could have gone after and targeted? Probably. Has she targeted people who should not have been? Absolutely. But, that parallel.
So I am going to tie this into what I know exactly what part
Right.
this has to do, and I'm going to tie it now, and I'm going to mess up our structure a little bit, but it's going to work. Trust me on this.
Okay,
Um,
I trust you.
so one of the things that people will often talk about with Yui is we've been talking around this kind of whole time about the difference between being innately born this way and being a product of your circumstances, and it's pretty clear that our perspective is that, she's always had the traits that were able to be drawn upon to make her who she is, but those traits were fostered and built and shaped, and she was molded this way, and she is also a product of her circumstances, just like everyone else. And people will bring up often, that kind, like the kind of like she, feels no empathy, she feels no remorse, she's fine with hurting people and she takes pleasure in it. She probably tortured people like animals when she was younger, that kind of stuff. And the thing is, you can like feel justified in hurting other people and even enjoy it without having been born that way, and that's not something that's very comfortable for us to realize, but it is fairly easier than we'd like to acknowledge for people to get to that place because of how they were treated. And so, like you were just talking about with Noel, Yui's thing is, does she take pleasure in harming people now? Yes, but only in the sense that she feels like she suffered so much growing up and getting to this point that she is entitled to it. That, um,
Kind
please
of
bear
like,
for a second.
people have hurt her so much that she feels like she is entitled to dish out the hurt that she's been given. Because if people have hurt her, why is she not allowed to hurt others?
Yeah, and this is something that's adapted from something that one of our server members had said, and I won't name names because it was like personal. Um, but that, it's possible to play with other people like that and not feel for them while still having the capability for empathy and love and being fond of people, where you're essentially harboring the belief that if the world was cruel to you and people made your own life hell, then you're entitled to do the same to other people. And you're so caught up in your own trauma that that is how your wounds are bringing you to view the world. And you're still capable of remorse and of empathy, but it only has kind of the room to breathe and come out after you have the ability to process what you've been through and how it shaped your view of the world and how people did or did not fit into that. And it's kind of like concept of, our emotions and our trauma and the way we process our negative experiences and different support networks affecting the choices that you make and the way that you see the world and the way that you interact with people and the path that you take. And it's so much easier to just kind of view people as, you know, they were always like this, or it just it got brought out a little bit more. And most of us could never be like that. We would never get to that level of hurting people. And if you have empathy, you would feel remorse. But it's not that simple when people have gone through traumas their entire life and eventually get into that kind of revenge arc era and have that feeling of my life was made hell and now I'm going to fight my way out of it, essentially, that our characters have gotten to. And this is how it ties in with, you were just talking about the parallels between Nol and Yui. And Nol very much does, on a smaller scale, the same thing that Yui has been doing the entire time that we've known her, likely most of her life, with Alyssa in 243, where he believes that he is justified in weaponizing Alyssa's trauma and scaring her and being mean to her because of what he's had to endure in his life. And because he has suffered so much and sat down and taken it for so long, he feels entitled to that moment and that confrontation and that kind of catharsis for him of taking it out on her. And many readers find this confrontation to be cathartic and warranted as well. And we know that Alyssa is a person who hurt him, but it doesn't seem like she ever had intention to hurt Noel. And most of his hurt and trauma that was taken out on her did not stem from her. She's a projection of that trauma, very much in the way that the rest of the world is a projection of the trauma that Yui endured in her own patriarchal family. And he he takes that out on Alyssa the same way that Yui takes it out on the world, once again on a much smaller scale. And he even communicates intentional malice by saying, I may be mad, but I'm not your father, as he scares her and sees these visceral physical reactions that she's having to his anger. And yet we can see how easily he justifies that intentional hurt that he's causing to Alyssa in this instance, based on his past and primarily what he endured from unrelated people from before he even knew her, comparing her to Kosuke and her words about her family trauma, reminding him of what he endured because of Kosuke and Yui. It's that same targeting of people by proxy and justifying intentional hurt because of your own suffering. And that's the foundational basis of how Yui rectifies her own actions. And like mentioned, hers just got to this kind of unimaginable scale where she was never able to rectify that maybe that's not a thing that should be happening, and process those traumas that she had and see that you don't have to navigate the world that way. But we see that same you know, urge to act that way in with Noel, and we see that same reaction from readers who identify with that kind of um like revenge and vengeance expression from Noel, as well as the kind of like, if Noel does enter an anti-hero arc and like kind of starts taking things out on some of the people who have hurt him, a lot of readers would be cheering for him and rooting for him. And that is very much the way that Yui stemmed. And it just got to a point where it was no longer about, you know, needing to survive and needing to fill that unmet need and only targeting those who have to be, and it got to that level of crossing that line and bringing innocent people into this game because you believe that by proxy you are justified in doing so.
Right. Especially with Null and his, like revenge arc, his anti-hero arc. It's kind of like, where do you draw the line? Especially when, we start to look at the story that's unfolding between Null and Kosuke right now, how as readers, we know that Kosuke was very much a victim. And we also know that Null is very well within his rights to be angry with Kosuke and sever ties. How far is Null allowed to take his, revenge arc with Kosuke before we as readers decide, I think he's starting to go too far. Like that's that thing with Yui. At what point are you starting to go too far? And something Casey said earlier in the comments was Yui's entire family was probably raised to reach for the top as well. With that in mind, Yui probably didn't have anyone telling her that it's okay not to be at the top of that hierarchy. And this kind of builds into a further idea I had is that unlike Yui, Null has a support system. He has people who will be able to anchor him and pull him back. If he does start to cross a line and he starts to take a revenge arc too far and he starts to cross a line, he's got people who will pull him back and say, hey, this isn't you. This is, like, what are you doing? I don't think Yui had that. She never had much of a support system, I think. Her family fostered this kind of ruthlessness, and she had torn down pretty much all of them. So she didn't even have a family system to even really be supporting her. Her husband is clearly a business marriage. There is no romance and love there. It's not something that's nurturing. There was nobody to stop her and say, hey, I know that you've been hurt, and I understand that you have been denied so much and that you are forced to live something that you don't want to live. Like, but you can't do this. She doesn't have any of that. Like when we see her being herself, she's always alone. And like the one time we saw her being herself around Rand, she was, like kind of, like attacking him. Like it was not like a, like, oh, I can be myself around you. Like she she has none of that. She never had anybody to pull her back from the edge.
And it just
And she clearly, like crossed that line and said, you know what? It also goes back to that mentality of like the weak girls and the strong girls, and the I am taking everything, and it goes very back to that root of the either you are destroyed or you destroy everything, and there is no point where you stop. You have to keep going, because if you stop, you're going to get destroyed. Somebody's going to catch up. You can never let them catch up.
and like it just feels it from what we can see of Yui and what we can see of Hirahara family and where she is at and how her life has been, it just seems like everything in her life has validated this for her. Because I mean, look at where she is now, you know?
Mhm.
And like in addition to the kind of like idea of not having a support network and kind of the weak versus strong girls. Another big aspect of Yui is the way that she plays and toys with women, which likely is also stemming out of trauma that she has. So there's, we have that we have that basis of this trauma that we've already talked about with her, being put down and denied things for being the youngest and a woman and having no support network, no one to, you know, validate her as a person and like stand with her.
Which in and of itself is like very much a trauma. Like
Yes,
being
very.
forced to play that role you don't want to play, being forced to be somebody you don't want to be, that is a trauma too.
Yeah. But I think this is a good time to bridge into kind of our speculations on what is up with Yui and, her relationship to people like the Kims and sexual assault. So this is the content warning for this section that we will be talking about assault. We won't be talking about anything graphic, but we will be kind of delving into the topic and how we think that it's related to Yui in her past and present. In the recording, I will timestamp this. I can't promise for this live Discord because in the past I've not been able to keep track of the live time very well. But yeah, so I will let you start this segment because
One of my
yeah.
favorite my favorite theories. Haha. um, I I keep coming up with the dark theories, and Kimchi keeps saying, "Hey, good job," and I'm not feeling great about it, you guys. I don't know how I'm supposed to be feeling, but there was a live stream where Kimchi did tell us that Yui's ambitions are very much intertwined with her trauma. And when she said this, I got to thinking and having a conversation with Elle, and I believe we were talking with Bonnie about this as well. Because I think, and this is something I'd been thinking about before, but I feel like in the terms of how I Love You has a lot of parallels, a lot of repetition, a lot of cycles. I very much feel like Yui is a person who was probably at some point in her past sexually assaulted. I'm not very sure at what stage of her life I feel like this happened, if it was something when she was younger. I know a lot of people think that it was the sexual assault that Rand oversaw that led to Grandpa Kim being ousted as the CEO at the time. I'm not entirely sure. I just haven't really quite made up my mind on where I think this falls, to be quite honest. But my general feelings are I feel like this happened. It just feels like it feels like it's such a foundational aspect of Yui and her relationship with the women that we've seen in I Love You, especially in terms of her mentality of, either you get broken or you weaponize what happens to you, right? Um, and I especially feel like this goes back to what we were talking about with her family too. Because it's kind of like, what if she was assaulted, and especially what if it was somebody close to the family? What if it was one of the Kims? Because it just feels like it has to be, just based on Eugene's articles, the fact that sexual assault is rampant in the Kim family. It's not just that it's related to Shin-Ae. It's not just that it's related to whatever happened to Eugene and Manwei's friend. It is central, and I think that means it's tied to Yui as well. So like what happens if you're assaulted by, like somebody who's like part of your family business, like they were the CEO of the United States of Asia, branch of the company. And like what if you bring this up to your family and like your father is like, well, you shouldn't have let that happen, like what if you try to approach this and your family makes you feel like you let it happen, or like you're weak for having let it happen? And like that's something that I started thinking a lot about, especially in that sense of that mentality of being broken or weaponizing things, and why, how, like, especially in terms of like, if this happened, especially if it was a Kim, why does she work with Gun Kim, and why is she part of his, sex trafficking ring? And it's just something that I've thought a lot about, in the sense that that mentality of I went through this and it's not fair that I'm the only one who went through it, which is a really horrible mentality, but it is, something that people do go through. Um,
And
and
like
oh, go ahead.
I was saying, and even further, I think there's absolutely the element of like Yui views her life as extremely unfair. She views life as a whole as unfair. She even says it to Kosuke in the crane game. You know, life is going to be unfair and there's nothing that you can do to change that. You just have to try to make it unfair in your favor and never feel sorry for taking the advantages given to you. Where that tells us that she views life as a whole as unfair and she views the cards that she was dealt in her life as unfair and just views herself as having been able to weaponize that unfairness to get her closer
Mhm.
to what would be fair. And it's very likely that in kind of this hugely patriarchal system, you know, her father or male figures in her family, if she went to them, would have, like you said, swept it under the rug, probably made her feel weak for as it I hate saying it because it's nothing that I would ever say to somebody, but what they would say is that she allowed it to happen because she was weak. Whereas, you know, her mother or female family members may have had a similar role to what she is having with Alyssa of rather than comforting or validating that hurt and trying to help them process through it, you know, taking it as a like both kind of like downplaying it and that like it's just
Mhm.
business, it's just what happens to people like us, it's just what those men do. And also the but you can use this, you know, you can weaponize it like all of the other trauma in your life, you can wield it as a sword and um use it.
Somebody said, when we were talking about like how Alyssa and Yui might have talked about it, how Yui might have even said something like, "Oh, think of it this way. It might mean that they think you're pretty." And
Yeah.
how, like, it feels like something that she might say, like a weird, empowering kind of sentiment. Like,
Yeah.
oh, don't think of it like as a bad thing. Just think of it as, like, oh, it means you're in demand. Like, and it does make me feel really gross saying these things out loud. And I know that you guys know I don't mean the words that I'm like putting in these characters' mouths, but I still feel the need to put that
It
disclaimer
just
out there.
feels horrible to say
It
these.
Right. It's one thing when you type it because like you're not verbalizing it, but once you're like speaking these disgusting sentiments, it's just like, oh, it just feels so skeevy to say them. But right, like it feels like that's probably the kind of conversation Yui and her mom would have had, is like her mom would have said something to her of that kind of sentiment. Like, this was a moment that was so traumatizing and awful for her, especially like when like not to like really drill it in, but like when you're thinking about if Yui is somebody who like she really resents the patriarchy, she really resents men in general, and then to be taken advantage of by somebody, like that the awful helplessness and then like, her mother finding this way to help her weaponize it and to try and make you feel like a little quote, quote, better. Like, it's just, and it really makes me think that this is exactly what,
What
like
happened?
what she and Alyssa did and what probably happened with her.
And
And that mentality of like, because she went through it, because life is so unfair, that's why I think she works with gun. Like, because, on like some rational level, you would think you went through this harrowing, traumatic experience. So you would think that no, you would not be doing this. You would be doing everything in your power to, stop this person. But one of the unfortunate truths that we know is that sometimes victims do become a part of those rings. And it I know other people have talked about this, and I don't want to put words in other people's mouths and like condense this in like a really bad way. So I'm not going to speak about it too much. But the general idea is like because she has gone do this experience, it's that kind of mentality that if you are quote quote dumb or weak enough to get trafficked by these people, you quote quote deserve what's going to happen to you. And then if you can learn to weaponize that experience the way she did, then good. And if you don't, well, I guess you deserved it kind of mentality.
And
Um,
like
oh, go
even
ahead.
even further, we know that the Kims are a family who has been doing this for a long time, and we know that young Chul Kim, presumably the grandfather, was the CEO of the US of Asia branch 50 years ago, and he had been the CEO for decades and only had to step down because these allegations came out. So like with what we currently know of the Kims, with what we have already seen, combined with the history in those articles, and knowing how close a relationship the Hiraharas and Kims have always had, and especially how prevalent the patriarchy has been throughout the Hirahara family, how normalized must this have been for Yui? Like how many other women did she either see go through this or know about it, or just you know just that it's literally that rape culture just
Right.
prevalent around her family. So she, in addition to kind of that like idea around weaponizing and strong women who weaponize it and weak women who, you know, you get what you get, um, she likely also carries the belief that this is just something that's going to happen, that women are going to be broken, both because of the inherent patriarchy and the way that they are going to be put down, and because things like this just happen.
And humans
Oh,
will be on top. So,
yeah. And so, you know, like you said, like it rationally, you would think that she wouldn't participate in these things, that she wouldn't want other women to go through what she had. But in addition to that, like deep down, like kind of rage and envy and like projection and like the wanting to see other people hurt the same way that she hurt. There's also that likely belief that since life is unfair and since the patriarchy is a thing and since this is a normal thing that insidious men with power are going to do, it's going to happen to most, if not all, women in some way, shape, or form. And by participating in these rings, she is exercising a kind of hand of control over it. And she is just exacerbating the process. She is just accelerating things. And, you know, she is just helping these women be broken down earlier so that when they inevitably endure these traumas, there is more time for them to learn to forge and wield their swords, and they won't have to wait as long as Yui did to get what they
right.
there's more time for them to come out on top afterwards because it's going to happen anyway.
Right.
She's
The sooner they go through this process of being the broken, the sooner that they can get through the process of rebuilding themselves. Let's go, girls.
exactly. It's literally a let's go girls where you're going to do it earlier so that time than I did. And then um by contrast, for the women who go through it and don't learn to weaponize it they were going to be broken one day anyway, you know?
Right.
Now there's either more time for them to be used as a tool by the strong women so that those women have more chance to prop themselves up, or whatever, who cares about them? They were weak anyway. um so like it
Right.
ties back into the idea of resenting the patriarchy and that like strong versus weak that she had internalized. And you know she is someone who does, in her own weird, twisted way, want to build up women, but also has that kind of envy and
hmm
because of the way that her life has been and because of everything she was denied for being a woman. And this is her way of exercising control over it, as well as continuing to validate her own worldview. Because very similar to Kosuke, like if Yui's worldview turns out to not be correct. Like, her whole life is centered around these core beliefs, and like, what would it look like if she actually were to rectify that? The world might not have been this way, especially when, unlike Kosuke, where things were orchestrated for his worldview to be validated because Yui needed it validated because of her worldview. Like, she does live in this world, you know? The Hiraharas did treat her the way that they did. The Kims do treat women the way that they do. You know, we see how she has gotten to the top through these methods that she's used. And it's like, yeah, it's just, you know, it's just her way of both validating her, like, really layering on the validation that already exists of her experiences and the worldview that she holds, as well as exercising whatever control she can over
Right.
it.
Yeah, something I was thinking about is how, like, I do genuinely believe that Yui wants to help people, but only the ones that she deems worthy. And like you said, that sense of envy. She doesn't like that idea of people being helped because nobody extended that help to her. Like, she talks about making use of those advantages that you're given, but a lot of like the advantages that she's had, she acknowledges a lot of her advantages are kind of like the privilege she was born into, because most everything else that she, again, she really had to scrape and claw her way to the top. When it comes to her advantages, it was taking advantage of things like her feminine wiles, perhaps. You know so that kind of mentality of, I'll help people, but only the ones who are worthy, but I'm not going to like extend my hand and help you that way. And we see that with Shin-Ae, like, she wants to help Shin-Ae, but she's not going to hand her everything on a silver platter. And we've seen that she's testing her, she's breaking her. She wants Shin-Ae to go through the process that she went through, because she believes that's the only way for Shin-Ae to, like, really go through that process. She's got to get broken down and crushed up into like caterpillar goo so that she can, go through the metamorphosis and come out a, big evil butterfly like her.
Exactly.
Um,
And this is the only way for women to gain power in this world. Like, they have to be broken down this way because they have to become ruthless because they're not going to be allowed to earn anything any other way. So with her worldview, she is helping, like you said, like, she has to break down these women in order to build them back up. And like, it's always so clear to me through the way that Shin-Ae is contrasted with both of the Cho sisters, but especially Alyssa, where like she has put the two of them through very similar things. She has
mhm.
preyed upon both of their needs. They have both taken offers from her in desperation. She has put both of them in Gun Kim's path. She has orchestrated for them to experience assault. She is trying to isolate both of them. She is offering them careers and success and long term, growth. And she is watching how they react to it. She is looking to see if they show the same traits that Yui did or not. She is looking to see how they get broken and whether or not they'll build themselves back up. And she is intrigued and kind of proud in what she has seen from Shin-Ae and wants to foster that and wants to foster the Yui that she sees in Shin-Ae, where she, like, originally was kind of just trying to break her down in that way and, like, the powerful woman thing, but she sees a lot of herself in Shin-Ae, and she, like you said, wants her to go through the process so that she can learn and become powerful. Whereas with Alyssa, she tested her and she didn't see herself in Alyssa, where, in the very opposite of the way that readers will look at Alyssa on the surface level and think that they see Yui. Yui looked at Alyssa and went, absolutely not, because they're not similar. They're really
Right.
not similar at all. And she went, okay, we're gonna break you down, and I guess you'll stay there because you are weak. And she moved her attention to Shin-Ae because she weeded out the strong one, you know?
Right. I feel like readers think that Alyssa is so in Yui's grasp because she went to the hospital with Alyssa, but I'm pretty sure Yui only went to the hospital because it was her opportunity to find out where Null was and go enact some more of her evils. Like if it was like, oh, Mrs. Hirahara, will you come meet with me? I'm feeling really down and I want to talk. It's like, oh, sorry, dear, I'm too busy. Go contact Gun. Ta-ta, I've got more important things to do now. It was because Alyssa presented her an opportunity, and for that moment, she was useful again.
Yes.
Um,
And
and
like,
oh, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna tie in one of my favorite Yui quotes. So if you have anything more to say on that,
Oh, go ahead. I was actually going to like change the subject a little bit.
great. I think all of this, everything that we've talked about so far, is really hammered in by the way that Yui talks to Rin in 221. And
Mhm.
there's several things that she says. Like somebody brought up, Yui leaning over Kosuke and the like, I'm having a blast as a middle-aged woman line, over Kosuke's drugged body in front of her blood-drenched husband. But the one that always sticks with me, and everyone who has ever talked to me about I Love You 221 comes out, knows that this is like my favorite line in the series. I bring it up all the time. It's one of the background images on one of the shorts that I made of us talking about Yui. But it's that when she's, standing there and she's saying that, if only someone had been there to tell her younger self that it does get better, but maybe if they had, she wouldn't be where she is now. Where it really just hammers in that, like, she was traumatized. She had a hard life and she was put down and she internalized it so strongly and fostered so much negative feeling and resentment based on it and drew upon this fight because of that trauma. She weaponized that trauma. And that's like maybe if they had someone had told her that it was going to be okay, she wouldn't be where she is now. Where like she was the person that she had to rely on. And that weaponizing of her trauma is what she views as turning her life around and getting her what she deserved. But it just hammers in all of that. Like Yui wasn't like, as much as we, and I'll make them too, as much as we make the jokes about Yui spawned, Yui hatched, she didn't just pop out this way. She was created. She is so much a product of her circumstances, and all of this is tied so strongly to her trauma. And you can tell me if you wanted to go somewhere different, but I think this is a good time to talk about Yui in a more concrete psychiatric sense, in the way that people kind of talk about Yui and what she might have, especially in the realm of personality disorders.
Okay, I think we can do that. I was just going to kind of like touch base of like how talking about like her worldview and how she her world has like her own set of moral code, but I think we can keep that at the end where we've already got that.
Okay. All right. So now getting kind of back to the the structure. I told you it was going to work.
It
Um,
works.
we're getting, yeah, it all ties. So I will preface this section by saying that, and this isn't to like, just pull out credibility for myself, but just to kind of be like, I'm not just, you know, like talking out of my behind when I go into the section where I am a mental health professional. I do work in mental health. I am not a doctor. I am not someone who has diagnostic criteria. I am not that level of mental health professional, but I do work on a daily basis with a lot of people who have significant trauma history, a lot of people who have personality disorders, and like this is my training and my field, and I do have above a layman's level of insight onto this, which is part of why we wanted to include this segment because it does come up so much around Yui, and it is something that is kind of important to talk about when talking about her character. Um, so the most common things that people will speculate about Yui is, I said, the cluster B personality disorders, mostly that she is a sociopath, sometimes that she is a narcissist, so antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. And also worth noting is that there's a difference between showing traits of a condition and having a clinical presentation of it. So, like, it is very possible for Yui, for example, to be a narcissistic person and have narcissistic traits without having narcissistic personality disorder. But I will fully disclose before starting the section that I don't read her as having either of these things. I especially don't actually read her as being a sociopath, which is what a lot of people um, view her as. Or I think that a lot of the times people kind of want to deny seeing Yui as having normal emotions and empathy because it makes it easier to rationalize how she acts and to have her be the villain. Um, but as we've been talking about, it's not so much that she doesn't interact with the world normally, it's that the world and kind of, if you can call it a support network that she was born into is messed up. And she's angry. She was given a hard life. She was given a traumatic life. She was born into this environment where she was slated to be nothing due to circumstances out of her control, and where everyone puts her down. And she has all these similarities to Nol, and we see how strongly that trauma manifested in the way that he has experienced his life and the way that she has experienced her life. And it's just like we have to view Yui in the whole context of her environment and her background, and the idea that this anger and resentment that she feels and this way that she, as we talked about earlier, kind of plays with other people and hurts other people is ultimately a normal human reaction to what she has been through. And a lot of this stems from her not having been able to process those feelings, not being in an environment where she is allowed to, and not living in a world where she should try to process and move past that anger, and where processing it doesn't mean um, taking what she's owed or letting go of what she wants. And so that was kind of a preface. Getting into more specifically these personality disorders and diagnoses around Yui, they're very often kind of hugely misconceived in the general population about what they actually look like, how people with them present, what especially lack of empathy looks like and means, and most importantly, the fact that lack of empathy is not enough to characterize these conditions, and that they especially aren't as explicitly tied to things um like wronging other people or criminal behavior as people expect, and calculatedness and callousness. Most of the diagnostic criteria for these is actually related to impulsivity, recklessness, and failure to uphold responsibilities. So as I mentioned earlier, while Yui may show traits related to some of the diagnostic criteria, and I do think that at times she does. She does show some traits. I don't think that she actually fits enough of the diagnostic criteria to be diagnosed with these things. And I don't personally see the way that she presents being similar to the way that the people that I've met that have these diagnoses actually presents. And I know like a that's me bringing in that personal anecdotes that our listeners can't experience unless you have also had those experiences. But that is, I will say, knowing many people, having been involved in the treatment of many people with these, the way that Yui presents is not the same way that they present. And also, as Solidarity just said, there's tons of people with, you know, especially antisocial personality disorder, but also narcissistic, that aren't criminal whatsoever, let alone deliberately hurtful. So that, it's kind of a huge misconception about the way that this presents. And also, I honestly don't think that it would change much about how to read her, even if she did, because
Mhm.
her actions are so much more a result of the trauma and being scorned by the world and feeling that this is the path that she should be on, the path of vengeance against those who wronged her, which to her is the entire world, as we discussed earlier, because everyone's guilty by proxy, and finally taking back what she deserves. And as mentioned earlier, she even wishes that she could tell her younger self that it gets better. Um,
Right. If you don't mind me interjecting for a quick moment, because I'm like you, I've never really bought into like the narcissistic, the sociopathic, et cetera, et cetera. And I know that Kimchi has stated before that like, especially because I know, and this isn't like quite related, but I do remember somebody asking once if, like she has any neurotypical characters or anything. And I think Kimchi is very deliberately not um, diagnosed any of her characters because her characters are so rooted in their own story that we, not to say that nobody should be, but like I don't think we're meant to be looking for diagnoses for them. We're you know I don't think she's looking for an external reason for them to be the way they are, like you're saying, Yui is very much the result of her anger, of her resentment, of the unfairness of her life, and how this is all like a very natural reaction to the that unjustness and that anger, and that being a very normal reaction. And I feel like when we try to look for a diagnosis or something like that, it kind of invalidates the writing that's really supporting her characterization. And that's like a really big part of why we wanted to do a whole episode dedicated to just talking about Yui and what like what we really think about her, what we see in her, and why it's so important to understand that basis of who she is as a character, because it's not about a psychological diagnosis. It's not about something that's going on in her head that makes her the way she is. We know that these characters are all the results of their trauma, of their experiences, and very often of their trauma not being able to heal, and not being able to meet their needs. And I think it's more important to focus on how those aspects affect them more than like you're saying, Elle, that you know there are so many people who do have these diagnoses, and they aren't these kind of maniacal evil people, and it really does them a disservice too to kind of like be like, oh yeah, you know, grade A narcissist right there. It's kind of like, oh, we're really, what's the word I'm looking for?
it's like it generally reads to me like people have, first of all, a very shallow understanding of what these things are like, um, and are looking for a way to dehumanize, particularly Yui,
Mhm.
where they and it like I I don't love saying this, but it is the truth where like if you're trying to diagnose Yui with ASPD and NPD because she, does all of these horrible things. What does that say about the way that you dehumanize real people who have these diagnoses and aren't at all like that, where
The
you
stigmas. That's the
yeah,
word.
it's that stigma.
Stigmas.
And it's very much that people are uncomfortable with the view that Yui wasn't always this way because it means that anyone can turn out to be like Yui. And the truth is, any one of us could have become Yui if we were in her circumstances. And that she is, like you said, a result of those circumstances. And like, yes, these conditions can develop due to trauma, but when people assign them to Yui, it's often with such a shallow understanding of them and such a stigma attached. And to drive my point home, I did want to actually go, because this comes up around Yui so much. I did want to actually go through what is the actual criteria that you need to meet, and what this still isn't so much what do these actually present as, because that is something that you kind of just have to experience. Like the way that it sounds on paper is not what it looks like. Even though, like, the diagnostic criteria is already not what people think it looks like, but even that is still not actually what the experience is like. But the big thing is that you have to have multiple presentations at the same time under specific circumstances in order to be diagnosed with these things. So let's start with antisocial personality disorder, because this is what she is most commonly um, put behind. And yes, solidarity to the DSM is very shallow, and that's part of why this does not actually correlate super strongly to how people who have these actually present. But if we're going to be diagnosing Yui with things, I'm going to be going through some criteria. And there's a lot of I'm seeing a lot of like great messages in the chat about how like it really just is perpetuating that stigma and showing how your own implicit biases are showing with people who have these, and that it's not fair to them, especially with a character like Yui, where you just go, Yui has evil tendencies, therefore I think she has this. And
And it's very much like going to WebMD and looking up, your symptoms. And it's like, oh, I have frequent headaches. I must have an aneurysm. I probably don't have an aneurysm, but we, except obviously this is even worse because, like we said, this is stigmatizing against people who do have these kinds of disorders, and we're perpetuating that. This is like, I've never really been a fan of media that, like, pits a character who is a psychopath as a villain. To me, it's very lazy, shallow writing because to me, it suggests that the writer didn't want to come up with an in-depth, complex villain. They took the lazy route and they're like, we're going to go and we're going to look up a whole bunch of traits, and we're like, okay, this is what they say a psychopath is, and we're just going to write this. And it's like, but what's the reason? What's the motivation? And again, like I said, it does such a disservice to the writing of I Love You. But again, it also, like, it perpetuates that stigma against people who are already having to fight this. Like, you don't know how many times I see a tweet going on about, like, oh, how to know if your partner is a narcissist, etc., etc. And it's like, like the littlest things that, yeah, carry on.
yeah, no, it really does, and we could harp on that all day. But yeah, that's, and like, not to shame anyone who has done this, because it's a lot of the time just coming out of that place of ignorance. But like, if that is you, I would very much urge you to kind of take a step back and like think about how you're viewing potentially these people and whether or not it's really fair to them. But so, looking at antisocial personality disorder, a lot of people, because of kind of that like presentation in media as like the sociopath or psychopath that is the villain, right? It's often viewed as this kind of like, they don't, they don't feel empathy, so they don't care about other people getting hurt, and they're, calculated and hurt people. But it's really way more about like like diagnostically and the kind of traditional diagnostic criteria, which, like, again, is followable, but that's what I'm going to be using because that's what we have here in our United States of Asia. Um, but it's so much more about like social norms and like impulse, um, and that hurts. So going back to the idea of like you have to fit certain multiple criteria for ASPD, you have to have at least 3 of these things. So I'm going to go through and talk about how I think Yui doesn't. So the first is failure to conform to social norms such as lawful behaviors, and indicated by repeatedly performing, you know, socially abnormal behavior. So on first glance, you could think that Yui does this, that she has this, that she, fails to conform to social norms. She is literally, she does commit criminal behavior, right? But she isn't, she isn't inherently just failing to conform to social norms. It's very like planned out, and it is normal in her social circle, and B, she literally lives her entire life within the expected social structures of her. Like, her whole thing is that she's trying in a very precise and thought out, purposeful way to undermine those things. You know, she's not just not conforming to the law. She is conforming to the expected social behaviors around her and views them as unjust, therefore is working within those systems to circumvent those symptoms. You're right, Solitaire. She is rich. The law is optional to her. Where, like, upon a first shallow glance, you could see it as she's not adhering to social norms. But when you look deeper into her, she very much is. And as we've discussed, that's part of her. Like, that's part of her whole deal. That's part of her whole trauma. That's part of the whole way that her family was being brought up. Where what is social norms for her is not what we would normally think of, because we don't live in Yui's world. Um,
Thank God.
Thank God. Yeah. The second, which this is where I think you could get a tick for Yui on, is deceitfulness as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. You could say that Yui checks this box. It is true, she is constantly manipulating and lying, and using other people to her advantage. Um, as mentioned, you have to have at least three things. So this is potentially one thing that you can tick. Although, again, it's not really just for kind of because that's, her innate nature and way that she interacts with the world. It's more so that she has been taught that that is the only way that she's allowed to act. Like, again, like the way that she is in private, she would so much rather not, right? Like, she just believes that this is the only thing that is allowed for her to do. But I'll let you potentially have that box. Impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. Not in the slightest.
No.
Like, she is so incredibly calculated. As we mentioned, she's often 3, 5, 10 steps ahead of everyone else. She views this entire chessboard from a periphery. She has it all planned out. There is nothing impulsive or unplanned about her. We're getting a question. Please hold for question. How about in circumstances when she is not in control? I was actually about to say this is really the time when we can see her be somewhat impulsive, but it seems to be about reining that control back in, and it's not just this kind of like constant impulsiveness and like failure to plan, but it's more so that she did plan things out, and she planned them out so strongly, and someone acted in a way that she didn't expect, and now she has to salvage the pieces, you know, where she has to act, and she has to act on her impulses and emotion because she has to save it. And it's also like, again, you can show traits of things without fitting a criteria where, like, when our control slips from us, how many of us are impulsive, you know? Where, like, it's that kind of like, when does it become clinical? And the fact that in so much of her life she is so planned and calculated says to me that it's not clinical. Okay, so then we have irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. This is again kind of when we're like, on the surface level, you can look at it and say she is irritable, she is aggressive and vindictive, but again, it's that, like, it doesn't seem to be just her nature and something that she can't control and something that happens. It's something that is very much in kind of an appropriate response to something else that has happened, and it's not like it's not that kind of like uncontrollable pervasive throughout her life. And we know that she hasn't received treatment for anything. So, like, she is just coping with herself the best way that she can. And if something were to be clinically presenting, she realistically wouldn't be in a spot to shield it as well as she does across the board. You know, she could shield a couple of things, but not everything. And she doesn't get into these kind of like impulsive lashing out at people. She's very good at reining herself in, even though she might feel those emotions. But again, those are normal human emotions to feel, especially in the situations that she's in. which indicates that it's not at a clinical level. The next one, reckless disregard for safety of self or others. This is again one more surface level, looks like Yui, but she's not being reckless about it. It's all for that goal. It is all so planned out and calculated, and this is just what needs to happen. This is what must be taken, as opposed to just kind of going through and instinctively doing these things in situations where they aren't really warranted. It's very much an in her world appropriate response to other things. Where like she wasn't just endangering Shin-Ae to endanger Shin-Ae, right? She has this mentality of strong women need to be built, and in order to be built, they need to be broken. So that disregard for the safety is in anticipation of a goal and a more positive outcome in the end. Then we have consistent irresponsibility, as indicated by repeated failure to sustain constant work or honor obligations. So we just don't have this one. She's constantly working. She again is planned out, so methodical. She keeps track of everything. She has gotten to where she is by being very on top of things and her work. So she doesn't, like, at any level, doesn't seem to have irresponsibility. And I see that Ashley is back. Welcome back. I don't know if you're gonna
Kind of.
talk today.
My
Hello.
internet is dead, so I'm on my phone. So I'm really, really sorry if I sound bad.
Okay. Yeah, Solitary said recklessness is without thinking or caring what happens to others. She definitely thinks about what happens. Yeah, I think the not caring fits more, but even with that, like, we see that there is some care about what happens. It's more so that she just kind of thinks that it's deserved and that it's, like, unavoidable. So, like, there's an element of not caring, but there is still a little bit of caring. Um, yeah, but definitely the, like, recklessness is without thinking. She thinks so much about what she is putting other people through, and um, also what she herself is going through. Um, she didn't care if Shin-Ae cracked her skull at the pool. Ooh. Um, yeah, I know this section might, like, end up slightly choppier because of the, like, chat, but this is something that I, like, want to hear people's thoughts on as we go.
That one is interesting to me because I feel like it was a calculated risk, but she was kind of reckless because she definitely risked Kosuke. It was like, because like she knew what was going to happen when she went for Null, and she knew that like Kosuke was literally dangling, but I feel like it was kind of like a calculated risk in the sense
Yeah.
that
I feel like it's
she
always calculated risks.
right.
And, like, the only times when she really isn't taking calculated risk is when she's in those situations where she doesn't have the time to make a calculated move, where she is just trying to put together whatever she can in the moment that she can, and she's still trying to be very calculated about it, as opposed to, being reckless and impulsive about it. Yeah, reckless has the or factor calculation not mattering. It's just like, I just feel like she thinks through everything that she does so strongly, and she is so attached to everything that she does too. Like, she doesn't care about things in the traditional sense where, like, she doesn't feel bad that other people get hurt, which we'll get to that in a second. But she cares a lot about the, like, what is going to come out of these actions. She thinks through these things very strongly. And, like, that to me says very much not reckless. Like, even if she is disregarding the safety of self or others, it's always for that purpose, and she is seeing something through.
That means will justify the ends kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Right. I see what you're getting at. I also see what Solidarity's doing too. Though. Like I know like she just likes to do this. She just likes to, like debate things. So I know what you're doing.
But no, I want this is a segment that I would love to like interact with people about.
Right, yeah. And I mean this is like the whole point of doing it in the Discord server. Like we could easily just, do this on our own. Like if we did not want Solidarity to, debate us, we would be like, go to jail. Get gone. Go on, get.
Yeah.
You can cut that part.
I think like being on recording makes like I think both of us feel kind of pressured to like keep going at all times, but like we have it in the Discord for a reason, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I agree that that's where you could get her on the reckless, but I think like the rest of the way that she interacts just negates that like reckless quality. Where like there is nothing this woman does that isn't calculated and thought through. She is so far ahead of everyone else. Serve me on a platter.
So like that is like my favorite thing about having discussions like this is like when people can change minds, because I do know that I tend to be very resolute in a lot of my opinions when it comes to I love you. Especially like I just feel like I have a lot of feelings where it's like once I've gotten to a point where I'm like I feel very strongly this way until the narrative gives me something different, which is funny because I like to think that I'm very open to changing as the story gives me different information, but I also feel like I'm very resolute about a lot of things. But also like Kenshi is like really kind of like validating me right now. So it's like, how am I supposed to change my opinions when you're out here really validating my experience?
No, I feel similarly. And I feel like both of us are kind of people where like if we don't feel like there's a lot of evidence behind something that we believe in I love you, we're not gonna ride for it, you know?
And that's probably why we're so resolute about things, because we
Yeah.
don't ride for it till we feel like we have enough information.
Yeah, where I feel like there are a lot of things where we'll both be kind of like, this could go either way, like I'm not sure, but those aren't the things that we spend hours talking about. You know, the things that we spend hours talking about are the things where we're like, I feel like there's so much here and I feel so strongly about this.
Next thing you know, you've got 14 hours of podcasts.
Yeah, we're like kind of get like brushed off until there's more available to them. And so I feel like that kind of creates the dichotomy of like we are open to like discussion and changing our mind on things and hearing other perspectives. But like the things that we are resolute about, it would take a lot to change. Okay, so criterion 7 is that lack of remorse and being indifferent to or rationalizing hurt, mistreatment, and things like that. And I do think that she fits this. Where even though we can see why she is that way, and she is likely very capable of empathy, at the current moment in time, she, I think, does present with this lack of remorse. But as mentioned, that's not enough. You know, it has to be combined with other things. And there are so many situations that can make you lose that empathy for other people and being indifferent and rationalizing her. And we see it with Kosuke too, where he has rationalized throughout his life the hurt that he caused Noel. And then once he was able to process the trauma that he had endured that led him to do that, he hasn't processed it yet, but once he started kind of processing that, that remorse comes back. And even if it like ebbs and flows, like it's capable to be there even though it wasn't before. And in Yui's life, I don't think that we have really seen any point of her having remorse or that like empathy for anyone else. So that's why I'm going to say like I don't think that we have anything to refute this other than speculation that she like may or may not have that capacity, but just based on what we see of her, I think that this is a box that you can check for her. But again, like that's not inherently that doesn't inherently lead to actually hurting other people. It doesn't inherently lead to the kind of behaviors that Yui has that can be a result of, as anything else, can be a result of trauma, can ebb and flow and be lost and come back and such. So without other criterion in tandem with it, which it's the other criterion are too great for her. It's simply not enough to check those boxes. In order to diagnose someone with something, you have to be able to check those boxes. And it can't be a gray diagnosis where she just doesn't fit enough of it. And like I said, she just doesn't read this way to me, where like she is very callous and very calculated, and she doesn't at the moment demonstrate remorse or really like care for hurt to other people, but she is doing it all within that confine of her environment, and that like very like the ends justify the means, and the ends are righteous. Like they're not just what she wants, they're righteous means. And that is that is leading to that justification for her, and it's just all very, very planned out and very, very reaction to her environment. And it's all filtered through the same kind of lens, as opposed to, a stark, like, she checks these boxes, she has these traits, um, where she just, in my opinion, it's too gray. You can see some traits of sociopathy in her, some tendencies, but I don't think that she meets a clinical criteria. And again, I think when a lot of people say that she does, they often don't have a good idea of what it looks like to meet that criteria, or what that criteria actually is. And as we've seen, like, there are people who do dig into it and like have valid arguments. But I think a lot of the time this comes up, it's really in that kind of like ASPD to criminal pipeline, dehumanizing her. Which, like I said, not always, but a lot of the time.
And this is also why, it is actual doctors who do actual diagnosing. And, like readers who are reading a story are doing, like you just said, like we're looking at a list of criteria and trying to determine if we think a character fits something. And like you're saying, like if something's set, like if we're reading this criteria, like, oh, this seems like it fits. And like you're saying, like if something is too gray, a doctor would never, like go with that. Like this isn't even like within the same realm, but like when I even think about how diagnosing for ADHD goes, because there's such an overlap between like what ADHD looks like and how anxiety and depression can manifest, and how they all have such an overlap, how you need an actual doctor oftentimes to do the diagnosing, because that's somebody who is a professional who has seen this and can witness it in people, and like you're saying, has that experience in seeing it in different individuals, and how to identify those traits, and how you determine whether or not these are traits or they are responses to someone's experiences. Because that's the other thing, is it's like when somebody's being diagnosed, you're not just sitting here and going, okay, yeah, so and so checks the boxes. It's what you're doing here is saying, okay, so this person, yeah, might check this box. However, their life experiences might debunk this because of this reason. And again, like I said, that's why actual doctors who went to school and have studied this, and have specifically studied this, are the people who are doing diagnosing, and we're readers.
Exactly. Like you said, like it's it has to be that nothing else could be the answer, right? For basically any diagnosis, there's always the like the disclaimer of like, this has to be no better explained by something else. So like the fact that first, and like like you said, we're sitting here reading criteria, and like I'm filtering through it through a lens of having more like personal and professional experience with this to understand a bit better what these criteria were written to mean. But like, I'm not a doctor. Like, I am also not someone who is qualified to diagnose anyone. It's like there's always those layers to it. And it's just the like, when there is that gray area, it indicates that more likely than not, that means that this person does not actually fit into this. And like that, yeah, like that's a lot of what I'm like getting at by like going through this and doing this segment of like, does she show traits here? Yes. Can you make arguments either way? Yes. Are any of us qualified to diagnose her with this? No, because for the most part, none of us are doctors. Like some of us have more or less experience. And as Solidarity said, none of us knew Yui at 15 either, so we can't diagnose her with anything, which is also true. We're only viewing this version of Yui that exists now.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have explicit information about what happened to her before, and it's so easy to look at some of these things and just go, oh yeah, she probably checks that. But it's like, does she really? Do you understand what that means? Do you know what it would actually look like to present in her? And so like,
and that kind of goes back to how a lot of what we're talking about here is largely speculation based on a few pieces of confirmation that Kimchi has given us and what we can glean from the text itself. And therefore, like I do understand why readers have looked to things like narcissism and antisocial behavior to try and justify her, because like when you don't have all the pieces of a story, you're looking for something that kind of rationalizes her. Where for us, obviously we've talked about Yui for a long time. We've dug into Yui a lot. The story itself doesn't give us, I mean, let me phrase this better, because I feel like the story gives us a lot to work with. It's just that so much of it is subtextual that we've had to read heavily between the lines, and it's something that I love. It's my favorite part of I Love You, clearly. But we also know that sometimes reading between the lines is something that people aren't always, they don't like doing, or it's something that they don't feel as good at doing, and therefore looking for something that justifies her, like you were saying, when you were saying that to diagnose somebody, it has to be that there is no other explanation for something, and like that just kind of made that connection in my brain. Is that's what people are doing when they're giving this diagnosis, is like with what they know, they feel like this rationalizes her, instead of trying to dig in a little more and going, what other reason could it be that you react this way? And again, like I fully acknowledge that a lot of our speculation has been heavily based off of like 3 factual points that Kimchi has given us. But, like I said, like we have a lot of reading between the lines that has gotten us here too.
exactly. It's all that subtext. And you really just hit it where you said like, it's that like, what like you get to the bottom of it when there's no other explanation. And like some people feel like these diagnoses are the bottom, but like we feel like there's things past it, that it's not the best explanation for why she is the way that she is. And the one that you mentioned that comes up a lot with her is narcissistic personality disorder, which I also want to talk about specifically. And like I know that I'm like going like kind of very methodically through points here, but just since this comes up so much, and since people very often WebMD her, and just look at criteria and go kind of shallowly, oh yeah, she checks that box, she checks that box, she checks that box, like she's got it. Like I want to like put out there in the world my take on like why I think she doesn't.
Right. Something to refer to.
And someone, and like we're in the chat, people are talking about how these diagnoses come from trauma most often, not inherently. Like they are explained by something. And He said, I feel like a lot of times people actively look to diagnose characters because they feel as if they need a valid reasoning for the character's behavior, but they need to realize that the environment of said character can be enough of an explanation. And I very much feel like this happened with Yui. And I feel like it's happened with Kosuke in the past too, but it's so much happened.
People so badly wanted to believe that Kosuke has bipolar disorder. So badly, because I couldn't understand how he could treat Shin-Ae this way, and then he would like whip around, and like, you know, that cognitive dissonance would set in, and they were having so much trouble reconciling with like how Kosuke had like this image that he presented, and how he would crumble the moment like his worldview started to shatter. And like we would try so hard to explain this over and over, and like people were so dead set on him being bipolar. And like that's not how this works, first of all. Like, second of all, like I need you guys to understand that what's happening here is that, like, you know, Kosuke has this, you know, like he has a fabricated worldview. And the moment that reality starts to, you know, like disprove what he sees and what he believes, he shuts down. Like, and you know, like he goes into these erratic moments because, you know, that's his trauma response. We know that he kind of like he lashes out. He tries to grapple for control, and the more that he feels himself losing that control and slipping, and like they were so certain that it's like, oh, he's got multiple personality disorder, he's got bipolar disorder. And I'm like, no, I need you guys to understand that this is Kosuke responding to his experiences. And I think that, you know, this goes back to that point I made earlier. I think Kimchi has very pointedly not written her characters as having any kind of disorder. You know, like Solidarity said, a lot of these diagnoses come from trauma. A lot of these disorders are the results of trauma, but I don't think Kimchi is writing them necessarily with them in mind, because she is writing them responding to their experiences, responding to their circumstances. Like she's really writing authentic characters in that sense. And I feel like once you start trying to pigeonhole yourself into writing a character, you know, like we've talked about before, like if you say that this character is, you know, manic, you're going to expect them to look a certain way. You know, like if you say that like Kosuke is autistic, the moment that she writes him doing something that does not fit your idea of what an autistic character looks like, you're going to be like going off on her, because it's like, oh, Kimchi's like writing bad reputation, blah blah blah, you know?
And
Um,
like,
and especially with like mental health, like you do not want to be the person who, you know, is like misrepresenting these disorders. But also, again, like she is just authentically writing these characters responding to their experiences, to their trauma. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like you said, like Kimchi is not Kimchi is also not a doctor, you know?
Right.
Even if she wanted to write her characters in this way, she is just writing them as responses to their environment and not trying to diagnose them. Do all of these characters have something that they could be diagnosed with, or at least like a good amount of them? Yeah. Is it like is
Not
it
like the crux of who they
yeah,
are and what their story is about.
exactly. It's, it's not going to be, a thing that explains who they are and why they do what they do. It's going to be a thing that has happened as a result of the circumstances that Kimchi has put them in. And when people kind of start searching for diagnoses for characters, it's often, at least in I Love You, in the cases where characters don't, because Kimchi's writing feels so natural that when a character is expressing a fairly accurate and likely depiction of something they could be diagnosed with, people don't harp on it because they understand how the character is reacting and what kind of how it ended up that way, and don't feel the need to try to validate and explain the character by it. Like, for example, Nol is suicidal. He is most likely depressed, but that doesn't get talked about in the same way that, like, Yui has personality disorders, Kosuke is bipolar and manic would get talked about, because one of them is, you know, whether or not Nol actually does have something clinically diagnosable, his presentation is very much more natural because it is just a natural result that came out of Kimchi's writing. Whereas, like, the things that people will bring up to often try to diagnose, like, Kosuke and Yui with, are being brought up without feeling like that, like, normal part of themselves and their experiences. It's being brought up more as a, like, I can't think of any other way to rationalize this character, so I am latching onto this thing that might explain it to me.
Mhm. And, something that we have also talked about before is, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, is it feels a little bit about how people don't always want to dig into these characters in particular. Characters like Kosuke, especially characters like Yui. We don't want to humanize them. We don't want to know that Yui was once upon a time somebody who could have been very much like Nol, who, if she had had a support system and somebody who could have stopped her and said, hey, I get it, you're hurting and you want to hurt people because of how much you've been hurt, but this isn't okay. People don't want to stop and acknowledge that Yui is somebody who was created by her circumstances. It's so much easier to believe she was born inherently evil because it's so much easier to hate her that way. I remember when we were first talking about our view of Yui, and I can't remember who we were talking with here in the server, but I specifically remember somebody being like, "You're going to make me cry about Yui?" And how it was like, we had all agreed that, this, it doesn't justify what she's done, but when you can understand her and you can kind of empathize with her, this is why people very often wind up favoring villains in stories, and why anti-hero characters are, so well liked in media, because, like, you know there's a fascination with, like, the inherent darkness of humanity, right? How, like, we all want to believe that we are the Shin-Aes in our lives, that we are the people who, no matter what, we are going to find it in ourselves to have the courage to do the right things. And we don't want to believe that we are the Alyssas who sometimes get afraid and can't stand up for things.
And
But,
even,
like, stories like Nol, where, like, those revenge arcs, people who, you know, they get the revenge. And if, like we were saying, if Nol crosses that line a little bit, there's going to be people cheering him on. Like, if he toes that line and he goes a little extra, there are going to be people who are going to be like, he deserves that. Even though at that point we'll be like, but does he?
and it's like, in addition to, like, that wanting to believe that we're going to have the courage to do the right thing and, not ever succumb to being afraid and not doing the right thing, like, the inherent kind of introspection and fright of acknowledging that people's idea of morality and right and wrong comes from somewhere.
Mhm.
It, at least to some degree, taught to you, and having to sit and be like, how do I make sure that the things that I believe are right are actually right? That when I'm having the courage to do the right thing, that I'm not being misled and doing the wrong thing. Like, Kosuke was misled by Yui. Like, Yui was initially misled by her family and stayed in that forever. Like, that,
And
like,
Kosuke so truly believed in it too.
yes.
Like,
And,
he had
like,
so much conviction that family comes first, that you have to protect the family, the name, the business. That is the most important thing. Like, his brother, he didn't matter. His friends, they didn't matter. The family business. And that meant if you had to sweep dark things under the rug to protect them, that's what you do. Because people are going to say things, they're going to do things to try to bring you down, and you can't let them do that.
exactly. And, like, to kind of, like, go back and, like, finish up because I think it's very clear where we stand, but again, like, just because it comes up so much, I want to talk about the NPD too. So
I'll let you sweep through this one. I won't interrupt.
So again, this is one where I feel like the kind of colloquial definition of expressing narcissistic traits and narcissism is often confused with a clinical presentation where they're two different things. Can Yui act narcissistic? Absolutely. Does she have narcissistic personality disorder? Again, I don't think so. So, narcissistic personality disorder is defined by a pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy present in a variety of contexts. And this has to have 5 or more criteria attached to it. So again, when looking at Yui on a shallow level, we see, yeah, of course she's grandiose and needs adoration and empathy. She's, she believes that God is on her side and has given her gifts, that she has the, righteousness and authority to do all these horrible things to everyone and not feel bad about it. She wants to be on top, which, we might equate with admiration. She wants to be looked up to and be powerful. But when you again dig into what these things actually mean when looked at a clinical presentation and how these things are on paper can sound like what's not exactly meant, I don't think that she actually falls into what this entails. So the first is a grandiose sense of self-importance, which it sounds like Yui would have, right? She thinks very highly of herself. She believes that she is deserved and owed all of these things. She knows that she's ahead of everybody else on the chessboard, that she should have these things, but the kind of key is that it's inflated without any merit. It's exaggerating your achievements and talents, expecting to be recognized as superior without any reason to, or said achievements or ability. So, when Yui is being grandiose, it feels weird to say, but it's kind of warranted. She was born in a situation where she was slated to be nothing. She was at the bottom of the totem pole, and she dragged herself up, clawed her way up. She is often, um, you know, running circles around these other people. Kimchi has said that she needs to be the smartest person in the room, but she often kind of is the smartest person in the room. She has all of these tangible achievements behind her belt that she worked towards and she genuinely earned, that fuels that sense of self-importance. It's not just that she is kind of delusional and believes that she is capable of achieving things that she is not. Um like she is kind of in line with her experience in the world and the world's experience of her, especially considering that she comes from such a high social status family with so much pressure and so much importance and influence in the world. um at least me personally, I don't feel like it is inflated.
So kind of like saying that her experiences have validated her sense of importance.
Or that her sense of importance is coming from her experiences. If that makes sense.
Right, as opposed to saying that she's not just this normal person who feels like she is entitled to so much more because she believes that she's something bigger than she is.
Yeah.
I think I get what you're saying is it's not that so not to say that how am I trying to say this? Because I get what you're saying is it's not saying that just because she's successful, she could be successful and still have an inflated sense of importance. But it's in this case, it's because it's so validated by the efforts that she's put in to get there.
it is proportional to the amount of effort that she has put in and the amount of work that she has done. Like I see
Okay, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Like I see the question, is that saying that narcissists can't be successful and talented? No, not at all. Because they can be successful and talented and have an inflated sense of how they got there, or an inflated sense of what they should get above that and what they are entitled to. That's not actually based on anything. Whereas like with Yui, we've been talking this whole time about how she runs so many circles around everyone else, and she often earns things that she is not given. You know,
So kind of
earns
like
depth.
if like a man who is like in her similar position, who like feels like he's just as like intelligent and talented as her, but he's like been given everything, and he doesn't work as hard as her, and he doesn't have that same measure of intelligence as her. We could view that as being perhaps more inflated, whereas like she has had to work harder for it, and she's had to actually make the effort that he might not have had to.
Yeah, it's very much that like her sense of self-importance is, in my opinion, fairly proportional to her actual achievements and talents, and she is not really exaggerating herself. Where like it's very possible to be very successful and talented and still inflate yourself, and I don't personally feel like that's what Yui is doing.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one. I see what you're saying.
I think when we're talking about how she inflates her charity,
Does she truly believe it's charity?
yeah, that's what I would say. I don't think that she actually believes that it's charity. That comes into a lot of what she says is it's rooted in truth, but it's deceitful. And like the amount of truth that is to it is that, she very genuinely believes, which is real in her circumstances, that people have to be broken in order to be built back up. So the genuine part of it is that she does think that she is helping people, and she does genuinely think that. But when she often talks about how charitable she is and like how, generous and helpful, she often it comes to me with an air of deceit, where she knows that that's not exactly what she's doing, and she knows that that's not how the other person is perceiving it. And it's
Part
part
of
of
that mask.
yeah, it's part of that mask for her to say that. Whereas
Like
I
it's
feel
we both know it's not what it is, but
yeah,
you can't call it out for what it is.
where I feel like in reality, the way that she views herself, other than the fact that like her kind of mission is founded on this worldview that is too generalized and like very much based on specific traumas to her, which makes it not quite right. Like while she believes that what she's doing is righteous, despite it not actually being righteous by objective moral, like that is something that has been warped by the world around her, not something that has been innately warped in her. So like other than that, I feel like her perception of herself is honestly very realistic. And like when she is inflating herself, she's doing it consciously in order to deceive another person and reach an end goal.
Part of that like persona that she is kind of forced to play. The whole
Yeah.
like, oh, a woman must be gracious. Like mommy homemaker has to be so warm, and like that fake warmth that, like even through the page we can feel that there's like absolutely no warmth to it.
Yeah, and it's that like she does manipulate people and she does give off a grandiose sense of herself, but like from what we've seen of her behind the scenes and internally, like it is often to get other people to trust her or to fall for things or to manipulate them. It doesn't seem to actually be that she believes that exaggeration. Like she is so often deceitful because again that mask and persona that she has to wear. And when there is a conscious awareness that has not been gained like through um really through processing and like therapeutic work, which once again we know Yui has not had. Well, we don't know that for sure, but we can strongly assume that Yui has not had. Um, that it kind of axes that as being able to fill that criteria. Where like if you are having a grandiose sense of self-importance, you're not going to realize that that's what you're doing. Where Yui is often very, very conscious of what she is doing, and when she genuinely believes it, it is pretty proportional to what she has actually accomplished in life.
I'm on board with that.
And also on that that kind of like funky territory aspect, if it's considered funky territory, that means you don't meet the diagnostic criteria. You know, where like if it's gray, that means that it's a no, because it has to be that it is pretty clear and there is no better explanation for this. Rich and powerful definitely makes her trickier to parse. And the thing is that I will help make or break you. It's I would say that it's not acting like a form of God-given power, because she is just setting off a domino, you know? Like she's not she didn't make the world be this way. She's just aware of the fact that it is this way and is setting things in motion. But like she is not the powers that be.
I feel like the way that she's acknowledged God in text too, when she said, if there is a God, then like he favors me, or however she said it, feels
That
like she doesn't see herself as playing God as much as like she is in this game, and that like how she's playing it has been validated by whatever higher being there is. Like if
yeah.
there is a God, he has decided that I'm doing right.
Yeah. Or like just whatever, if there is a God, whatever God is out there, I'm playing the game the right way.
Right. Like that's how I feel. Like I don't really feel like she thinks she's playing God. Like I think she believes, like she clearly doesn't think she is equals with everybody. She knows that she has not prestige, what's the word? She knows that she has privileges over people. But I don't think she necessarily believes that it's like God-given privileges as much as like I feel like because Yui is so proud, I don't think she would necessarily even want to believe that some other force has given her what she has. Like she acknowledges that she has privileges, but she also acknowledges that, like a lot of how she got where she did is her, like it
Yeah.
feels like she would feel invalidated if she was to say that, yes, I have been chosen, or at least that's my interpretation of her.
And like
Um,
much as you can say this about somebody born into so much privilege as Yui, but because of where she was in her family versus where she ended up, she is in a way very self-made. Like once again, like a really weird thing to say about somebody
right.
as privileged as Yui. But in that context, like I feel like that best communicates that. And I feel like she very often just acknowledges the amount of work that she did to put herself where she
Right.
is.
Right, right. No, yeah, I'm with you, Solidarity. I think,
Oh yeah.
yeah, that's the thing with Yui is like, I feel like she has to acknowledge the effort she's put in because she's not like these men. She has worked hard. She has
Mhm.
earned this and she has earned it 5,000 times over them. Um, but yeah, and I definitely see what you're saying too, is like, is that concept of being chosen by God is like a good example of it, and it's also like the example of why I think it doesn't apply to her, just because I feel like she wants her accolades, she wants to be known for what she's done. Like it goes back to like that's her trauma. It's like
Mhm.
she has been stripped of everything that she has ever done and like relegated to this one role that she doesn't even want. Like everything that she is capable of, everything that she has ever achieved, that's not even what she's known for. And like yeah, I think that really kind of confirms that for me at least.
Yeah. And so going on, another one is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. This is again one that I think that on a surface level you can say she's literally chasing this like huge up there, like, corporation, like, huge power seat. Her whole goal is to get in this huge power seat. But again, it's like that, like, it's not with who she is, with where she's born, it's not really an unrealistic goal. Like, it's not this fantasy of being gifted this insurmountable, unattainable, unlimited success and power and brilliance. It's literally a a thing, tangible thing that her family has held for generations and that she would be legitimately entitled to had she been born slightly differently. Like, it's that kind of thing where, like, we can't view Yui on the same plane as most people because she was born in such a different um like circumstance where it's not that, like, fantasistical kind of delusional thing. um yeah, and Salah said this doesn't seem like her at all so far. It comes off more revengey and self-coddling motivated. I agree. Like,
And again, this kind of goes back to that humanization of Yui and how I think sometimes people reach for these diagnoses because it's really difficult for people to reconcile with the concept of Yui being human, of there being a part of her that is at all potentially relatable. Like this concept that Yui is a person who has been denied the things that she's wanted, that her story is generally one giant revenge arc that on some level, while we cannot justify, we can sympathize with. And like I know we're a broken record. I'm sorry to people who may not like that aspect of our podcast, but um that's a very reoccurring theme with I Love You characters is that even the worst characters have parts of us in them. Like even the worst characters are very human. Like, they're that's the beauty of how they're written. And we have to face that aspect of them. Like to me, that's what makes I Love You so compelling and so good is because we see those moments of like how things went so wrong. Like being able to look at Yui and know that once upon a time, she was this really ambitious girl who, like we understand that she grew up in a family really different from us. So like, she was never like this young bright-eyed girl who like was soft and has been like turned jagged by the world, but like she was once this person who had so much ambition and desire, and no matter how hard she fought and tried, she was denied everything by her own family, very likely by everyone. Like when you think about what it like we favor Rand a lot, and understandably so. But when you think about what it must be like to be somebody who never even wanted to become mommy homemaker, probably like I genuinely believe Yui probably never wanted to have to marry, let alone have to be a mother and play a wife. But to be forced into that role because the only way you get to even be a part of your family company is to marry a man. And then your father favors him. He is, by like all legalities, considered the son. You're the daughter. You were raised by them, but he is the one who is favored. Just like, what is that like? Like, you can't help but kind of, feel for her, right?
yeah, it's like Rand is this man that, like you said, she probably never actually wanted to marry. And it seems very much like she picked a foreign man with good business prowess because she knew that she needed somebody who her family would take to enough to let be the CEO so that she could be, the wife of the CEO. But that she picked a foreign man because she thought, and like a rags to riches story, because she thought that the xenophobia and like probably classism would eventually win out over sexism, like where she had to do it in that roundabout way. And she like and like so like Rand has been adopted. He is, even though he wasn't born to them, he is the biological son now. And Yui, even though she is the actual heiress, she is the Hirahara daughter, she is treated as like the wife who married in.
And like, wouldn't that be so frustrating to you? Like, even though we know that Rand is a good man, like, that must be so frustrating. And like, that is the thing about Rand's affair, is that it wasn't about the infidel. It wasn't that he had a mistress. It was that he was brought into this family and that he went out and he had an affair that created a potential heir. Because, like, as we were discussing earlier, the problem is that hierarchy. It's that Kosuke was supposed to be the heir. And now, with the birth of his other son, that created a potential spare. And this is one of those things where, like, discussing the Mukoyoshi theory, even on Reddit, like, within like the last 2 years would be so difficult sometimes, because it was one of those things where, because it's not confirmed textually, so many people didn't even want to entertain it. And it's like, okay, but I feel like it's a very valid theory that's worth really considering, because why else would Yui treat Nol and Rand this way if not for the fact that Nol has threatened Kosuke's future, you know?
And
Um,
like,
and so that's like kind of that thing, is like, to some degree, like, it's not okay that she has like harassed and destroyed this child, but to some degree you understand why Yui has this wrath. She brought this man is brought into her family. He has been favored over her. He has been given more in her own family than she has, and he went and like had another son, and like, just like how it makes her look. You know, again, like, I don't think Yui ever cared about the affair. Like, I think she was like, he can go and sleep with however many women he wants, as long as it never reflects back on me. But the moment it reflects back on her, the moment people are going, oh, poor Yui, her husband's been out having an affair. And like, you know how people are when, like, there's infidel, and it's like, oh, there must be trouble in paradise, like, just like the gross sexism about it,
yeah.
and
And
ugh.
and like with Yui, like again, it's she has been playing the long game for her entire life. And she, like, Rand was a part of that, and like you said, he got more than she did. And she her like ultimate plan was to use Kosuke to take back the company and raise herself just that little bit above where she was when she was just the wife of the CEO. And he brought in an heir that's competition and jeopardized everything that she has spent her entire life working for, all of the sacrifices that she's made, all of the hurt that she's caused, all of the hurt that she's endured, all of the moves that she's thought 10 steps ahead and put in place. He just, like, you know, like, he
Love it.
just threw a knife down the center of it all. And she, like, not only is she angry about the way that Rand has been in her life versus the way that she has had to live, and like what he is afforded that what she has not been afforded her entire life. But she's also, her whole treatment of Noel, like, I mean, there's indulging in it in the, like, Noel represents a lot of things for her, and she probably doesn't mind seeing him get hurt, but so much of it is damage control, where she has, as we talked about earlier, that mentality of, you either weaponize trauma or you break, and there is no other option. She has not seen a world in which another option is possible. Like, I so strongly get that impression from her, from the way that she treats other people, from the way that her life has gone, from where she is, from the way that she talks about herself, and especially her younger self in 221. I just get the impression that she very genuinely is under the impression that you either wield your trauma as a weapon and get your life back on track by taking what you deserve, or you crumble and you break down and you die. And
And
with
she's determined to like break him. She
yes,
doesn't even want the weaponizing. She wants to break him to that point where he will never be able to weaponize it.
Exactly.
And again, like as we've talked about it, the only reason he's even able to stay alive right now is because like she needs him to, motivate Kosuke. That's the only
Exactly.
thing.
And it's like it's so much more than just she doesn't like she's doesn't feel empathy, so she's angry and she takes it out on them and doesn't feel bad about it. It's literally she thinks that she has to break
Mm-hmm.
Nolan's touch. Otherwise, he is going to realize that he can become a weapon that destroys her, and then everything that she worked for will come crumbling down around her, and she will be relegated outside of all of this forever, and she will never see the benefits of all that suffering that she has endured for so many years, and all of these moves that she had planned for so long, and all because this husband that she was forced to take, that she didn't want to take, that was just a part of just a small part of this huge plan, created that competition. And
And
so
you
she
know what's something we haven't really gotten around to talking about regarding Yui and Rand is what if they had an arrangement,
which
Like we've
is
discussed that this is very much a business relationship. They probably had an arrangement amongst themselves. How honest Yui was about it, I'm not certain because, like you said, I very much think she was banking on the xenophobia rolling in her favor. But, like, was there any us against them kind of plan in the works that she was hoping to, be able to use and throw him under the bus and come out the champ? And, like, how early did the chess games start? Like, were they from the beginning, like, both playing each other, Like, was
I,
she under the impression that, he was on her side and then he went and did this. Oh no, we finally lost ice all cue.
oh no. I've been going for a very long time.
I know.
But yeah, it's just like it's just so much more than her. It's so much more than the affair. It's so much just her not feeling bad about hurting other people. It's so much more than her taking out her rage on them. Like she and Rand had this business relationship and she had a plan and he threw the hugest wrench in it that he possibly could have and literally threatened to dismantle all of her life's work with like no effort on his part. And she, because she knows that it's possible for Noel to become her, he has to make sure that he doesn't. And the only way that she thinks that that's possible is by breaking him down so much that he can't even see which way is up.
Dismantle him before he gets a chance.
Yes.
And it goes back to that point that we started out with. Like, that is the way that her family is. Like, there's never been anything else that she ever knew. And, in her mind, that's exactly the way it would go. At some point in time, Noel is going to grow up and he is going to come after them. Like, when she poisoned Kosuke's mind with this paranoia that Nessa and Noel are going to come after them and try to take what's theirs, it's because this is a legit fear that she has, because this is the way of her life. This is what her own siblings would have done, what her own cousins would have done. At some point in time in her worldview, in her family and her world, Nessa and or Noel were going to come for them. And, they would have been well within their rights to try to take what was theirs because it was also partly theirs.
Yeah.
So,
Going
like there is some justification. Is it good justification? But it's there.
But like going back to kind of that like old-timey royal family dynamic, how many rulers had those who they viewed as competition killed, whether or not they actually posed a threat?
Like even like your own family members, like look at the Tudors.
Exact. I always think of the two.
I always think of the Tudors, like Mary Elizabeth, like come on.
Yeah, and it's like it just makes it makes sense. Like, it's not right, but it makes sense. And she is so much a product of her world.
And it's very much why, again, we cannot look at Yui through our own lens. Yui is not part of our world. She does not operate on our own morals. She doesn't use our our sense of morals and justice. And that doesn't dehumanize her in any way. It's just she has a different code than we do. And it's really important that we look at that, because that's what anchors her, I think. Like, we have to understand her point of view. Like, Yui, like me, I wouldn't act the same in Yui's shoes, because like I don't have her morals and ethics. I would be destroyed in her world. That's why I'm not in business. That's why I don't, like, want to go up higher in the business food chain. I'm just not that kind of person. It doesn't, like, appeal to me. But and you can't look at her through our normal people lens, because she is not normal people.
Exactly. And this is kind of coming back to, like, going back to kind of this idea of, like, debunking these explanations of Yui. Was that believing that you're special or unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people, or, like, to a certain extent, she associates with these elite people. She tells Shin-Ae that she should know the right people, that she should network. She tells Kosuke that other people are beneath them, but she she actually pulls so many, like, different walks of life into her games. And I mean, granted, she's, like, using people, but she also sees herself in so many other people. Like, if she really thought that she was on this absolute special level, this high status level away from other people, she wouldn't see herself in Shin-Ae. She wouldn't, she wouldn't pick up Shin-Ae and Yujing and the Cho sisters and, like, kind of toy with them in these ways to see, you know, who is capable of surviving and who's not, because they would already be beneath her, you know? They're already
Right.
not from her world. Like, she and the people from her world, she seems to resent, She, like, going back to that kind of, like, Shin-Ae at the formal Furgun Kim theory, like, where she kind of gave Shin-Ae to Sangchul so that Gun would get, like, his son's sloppy seconds, essentially. Like, she the resent she likely has for her own family and father and such, like, she doesn't view them in this, like, kind of special vacuum, like, that's just inherently granted, like, she sees some separation, but it's like it's that, like, networking separation, right?
Right. And to be fair, like, when she tells Shin-Ae she needs to network, it is absolutely because she needs it for occupational reasons.
Exactly.
Because she knows Shin-Ae does not have anything to stand on. She needs to network with people in order to get ahead. She's telling Shin-Ae, you need to find advantages. You need to create these opportunities for yourself.
Exactly. Okay. So we have a question. Do you see her end goal as pulling strings through Kosuke or incapacitating all the men once she's done with them and in a position to take power? I personally, I think that her, like, in her mind, realistic end goal is pulling the strings through Kosuke. I think that that's what
Mhm.
she thinks she's going to be able to achieve and where she plans to go. But I think her ideal goal would be dismantling this whole structure and being able to, like, not just put herself on top for the sake of being on top, but, like, have what she has actually earned and deserved throughout her life, and, like, dismantle all of these men who are just given things because they're men and who are able to take power that they don't deserve. Like, I think that would be her ideal ending, and it's like kind of a, if I can get there, that'd be awesome. But I think what she thinks she can actually get is pulling the strings through Kosuke, and that's part of why she's spent so much time making him so reliant on her and aligned to her, and trying to make him think that he can't do anything else. Because I think that that is where she thinks this is going.
Right, like, Kosuke was never allowed to have any other option. This was
No.
it. And it had to be in a manner where he, like, she has to be able to work through him. Like, I've always been of, like, that shadow puppet mind. Um, I've okay, so I'm going to fully admit I'm not a corporate or business minded person, so I don't know limitations of things at all. So when I like muse about things, it's just I don't really know how things work. But I've definitely given thought to whether or not she would be able to, through Kosuke, push for changes that would enable her to have a little more power and
That's
start to
a lot
edge
of what
things out. Obviously, I think the board of directors probably would be able to stand in the way of things, I would assume. Again, like I said, very limited knowledge here. Sorry to disappoint everyone, but I've always wondered if she would, like kind of push for that, because something that I started thinking about, especially as we started to see how very little concern she actually shows for Kosuke, and starting to see kind of like what are the effects of him being drugged by her for so long, is would she be willing to throw him under the bus at some point in time? And yes, absolutely,
I
I believe she would, if she knew that she would be able to move in his place. Very like,
yeah.
oh, Kosuke's not doing well lately. Like I'm going to take over his duties for a little while, and like slowly start taking over that position. Again, like I said, I don't know what kind of limitations would prevent her from being able to actually do that. But like, I've always felt like if she could, if she was able to pull it off, that's how she would do it. She would start by going through Kosuke, pulling those strings, and then incapacitate him, and then like, oh, I'm gonna start taking over some of his duties, and then just like slowly start the takeover from there.
I quite agree. I think that she basically, like I said, like I think puppeteering through Kosuke is, what she thinks that she can get, because she, the powers that be, aka the men in the company, are very much against her, have always been against her, are still against her, show no sign of changing their minds anytime soon. So like she knows that she needs to have a man to puppet in order to be in control. Um, but like in the way that she can't get them to change anything, like because they're sexist, they'll take him seriously, And like
Right.
she can use the power gained through him to try to change things over time. And it goes back to that, like, if she had a daughter, of the like part of it is creating what she views as a better world for these women in the future, both out of like genuinely not like thinking that this is unfair and not wanting to see it happen, and like that envy of who they might be able to be that she couldn't be, like where it's that like weird kind of like double, like dichotomous nature to it, where like I think it's very much in that, like, if she can, she will, if she could, she would, where
Right.
like if it was something she could have done already, she would have, but she can't. If it's something that
Right.
she can do in the future, she will, but she might not be able to.
Right. So ultimately, it's very much been, if she has to do it through Kosuke, that's the way she's going to do it. But
Hmm.
yeah, I always felt like if there was a way for her to weasel him out, though, she would definitely try it.
Yeah.
And I felt that was probably why it's so important for her to get him into that position first. It's like, maybe it is that she needs him in that position before she can start, pushing things. But like you said, there's so many people in power who don't want her to have it, that I
Yeah.
feel like, it would be very difficult for her to pull off what I propose.
And like part of her anger and resentment is that she does seem to have accepted the reality that they will never let her be in the position that she wants to be, and she just has to get as close as she can.
Mhm. And like, to only be able to taste that through your child, to like have to use your son as a puppet, like, again, that resentment is, like, it's so justified.
It is, and like it's just so much like once again, like, Yui didn't just spawn. Yui doesn't just have traits that are abnormal that cause her to do these things and believe these things and behave this way. Like, she has behaviors that are abnormal because of her normal reactions to these circumstances.
And like humanizing Yui is, I feel like it's such an important part of being able to understand her, and therefore the general narrative of I love you. Like, sometimes we still see people talking about, like, if not the affair, then why does Yui treat Rand and Noel this way? And it's like, well, let me sit down and talk to you about a little thing called the patriarchy and resentment.
Yeah.
And like, Yui's an ambitious woman, and we've talked a lot about how both Rand and Yui were positioned in roles that, like, I mean, Rand clearly wanted the role he wanted, but he also wanted to play that father role that he never got to play. Yui didn't want to be mommy homemaker. She wanted to be in the office. And, she was denied that in the same way that Rand was denied the opportunity to be the father that he clearly was longing to be. And we've seen them taking it out on each other. I mean, okay, I guess Rand wasn't exactly taking it out on her because he was kind of like suffering in silence, but like, it's so unfortunate to see how their stories unfolded, because once again it always goes back to like unmet needs, and like how different stories would turn out if people could just have those simple needs met. Like, if Yui was just allowed to be the like powerful businesswoman she wanted to be, so many lives would be fine. There would be so much less trauma. Like, when I think so much about how like so much of I Love You is rooted in Yui. Like, every time we talk about how like we still know so little about Shin-Ae and like Shin-Ae and Shin-Ae's mom, and just like that feeling that there has to be a connection to Yui because everything is connected to her, and it's just like just not knowing the right formula of like how it all factors in. It's just like if Yui had been allowed to be who she wanted, like Kosuke would have been like a prickly little cactus boy,
Oh,
I mean, I guess Kosuke wouldn't be
a soft
in
prick.
existence because she never would have had a child, but
Yeah.
um it's just
He wouldn't be traumatized.
it's one of those things where like we talk so much about how ultimately that is what it all comes down to, is unmet needs, people who have needs that go unmet, and how you know how do you handle it? Like, we see how Noel shuts down. We see how Shin-Ae, she also shut down, but she shut people out. We see how Alyssa is blindly grappling for anything that looks vaguely like her unmet need. We see how Yui has decided to take it out on the entire world for denying her what she wanted, and for participating in the game that continues to deny her what she wants. And it just always comes back down to, if people were able to have what they needed, things would be so much better. And like, it connects to real life. Like, I'm gonna be the person who says it. Like, capitalism, okay? If people have their security, and they have their homes, and they have their food, and they have wellness, and they have, they don't have to worry about anything, things are so much better.
They are, and it's like people don't, generally speaking, people don't lash out for no reason, you know?
Right. And that's Yui. Yui has a valid reason for lashing out. She has gone well beyond the justification of it, and she has certainly crossed the line of, you are no longer lashing out at the people who have hurt you, and you have now crossed into the territory of victimizing innocent people. But like, she very much was a caged animal who, you know, she's always been feral. Like at no point was she ever domesticated, basically. Like that is the weirdest analogy that I can do, but like, like she's always going to bite the hand that feeds her because she's the hand that feeds her, I guess. It's
She
we,
just she like she has been kind of forced into such a tunnel vision because every time, like very likely every time that she did something to earn something and did it the right way, she didn't get what she needed back. She didn't get what she expected to get back. She didn't get what she should have back. Like her expectations weren't out of line. It was that they were having her play by a different set of rules. And
right.
so, like, she got so tunnel visioned into it, and but like you said, all of this is justified with what she's experienced, and like she is ultimately the hero of her story. She is the girl who was born and not expected to be able to have anything. She was the spare, she was the backup of the backup, and she fought her way and she clawed her way to the top, and she is rebelling against these bigoted, insidious, power trippy men who are putting her down. She's rebelling against the system of the patriarchy. She's proving herself. She is raising up other potentially powerful women with her if they will just, you know, play along and do what they have to do in order to get there. And she is changing her world and everyone else's world one Yui move at a time.
And thinking about it too is like her trauma never stops. Like we talked about, like obviously she's never really got therapy to work on it, but it never ends. Like it's continually festering. But again, when you think about like every single day that she has to wake up and put on the mask, put on like the costume, go out and play that role. Every single day that she is not achieving her dream and living the life that she wants to, and she's being forced to play that role that she doesn't want to be, like that's prolonging and exaggerating that trauma for her. And just, it just continues for her. And so I think it kind of takes back to that point where it's like, for Yui crossing that line, there's kind of a point where like for her it's hard to see like if she ever crossed that line, because for her it's so continuous. Like we know that she's hurting innocent people, we know that she's taking this out on people who don't deserve it, but to her, because she's continually living this trauma, continually living this existence, like it's a constant for her.
And it's like, at what point when you're like you said, constantly undergoing that same trauma, are you able to take a step back and like critically examine and process, especially with no one like providing you a world where that's an option, you know?
Right. Like Kosuke is only able to do it because, he's had that anchor in Nol his whole life. He's had that anchor reinforced in Shin-Ae. He had that experience in college where he got away from all of that. And, for a brief time, he was a real boy. He's had enough experiences to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not disprove. Um, he's had enough experiences that go against his current worldview that have made him question things. And like the funny thing about how, we talked about Yui has raised Kosuke the way that she was raised, but Kosuke, he still had those expectations, like he has finally been able to step back, and he was able to justify so many things because he believed that ultimately his mother was guiding him with, justifications that may not have worked for other people, but work for them ultimately because it's for the good of the family. and for the good of him. And now that he's realizing that, like, she's never really had his well-being at the center of anything, he is starting to realize that she's not who he ever thought she was. On some level, he believed his mother cares about him.
Yeah.
Like, he again, I know we also repeat this a lot, but Kosuke, even though Yui raised him to be her likeness, he is not Yui. And like his experiences with Rand and his glimpses into Noel and Nessa's life have provided him enough to know that there was something that Yui was not providing. And for him to yearn, like, he didn't receive it, but he's yearned.
Yeah, it's just like there's so much depth and complex dynamic in the Hirahara family and Kosuke and Yui, and like it's just all set up in such a way that once again like makes sense with like how their experiences have been, what their personality was likely like from the get-go versus what their experiences have been, what the world has validated for them, what the world hasn't, what they have seen, what they have experienced. It's just like
It's just that we always have to remember that Kimchi has written these characters to be characters who exist within the confines of their worlds and within their experiences. They aren't like a really organic thing about the way that Kimchi writes is it's not like a lot of the times when we write characters, we're like, okay, this is my character's personality, and then we kind of define why they're the way they are. And you can feel that Kimchi's characters kind of developed as she developed their story. Especially if you've ever been privy to the fantastic Patreon live stream where she gave us a glimpse into what her very original I Love You was like, where we get to see that even though the original I Love You was like nothing what it is today, we can see how the essence of a lot of those characters already existed, and we can kind of get a feeling for how they probably evolved as her story evolved. Like, you can feel that they grew organically within the world as she built up the story, as she altered things, as she created this story. It wasn't that she decided that, oh, Kosuke is going to be like this really complex character who has a bunch of issues because of blah blah blah. Like, you can feel that I don't like the mentality that, like, sometimes writers do this thing where they're like, oh, my character told me that they have to do this, like, and I used to be one of those people, so I can say this. It like obviously we are in charge of how we write our characters, but you can feel that, like, they evolved as she wrote them.
yes,
That there was this. She was creating experiences, and how she wrote their responses were just so organic. And this is why we can't sit here and say that, yeah, let's sit here and check off a whole bunch of boxes from WebMD, because again, these characters are they're just as human as we are, in terms of how they're written.
exactly.
um and so we've always got to look at them in terms of their circumstances and how they respond to them. And again, also, like you said, what validates that? And I think that's like a really, really important bit that a lot of the times we don't think about. Especially with characters like Alyssa, like, why do they keep doing things that we feel like they should know are wrong? Because things validate them, or validate their experiences, and validate this belief. Because when they do this thing and this result happens, it tells them this response. So that's why they never do it again, or why they keep doing it. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
Is I feel like this is kind of a natural concluding point. Is
Hmm.
there else that we want to talk about?
No, I was just going to say that I think Yui is an incredibly human character. It's just you have to see her as the human.
Ex-
Um, I think so often we want to think of characters like her as monsters because they're doing very monstrous things. And it's really hard to believe that characters like that are human. But as we have seen and as we've talked about a lot, there are very real people who reflect a lot of the characters that we have in I Love You. And they're very real people. We tell ourselves that they're monsters because, they behave in ways that we feel like are monsters, but ultimately, they are humans. And like I, I don't know, it's just Yui is a very human character, and I think being able to sympathize with her makes people uncomfortable. But I think that's what makes her so compelling is that, there was a time where she was such a sympathetic character. It's just because of how much unjustness and how much hurt she has experienced, she's gotten lost in it. That's what makes the parallel between her and Nol so interesting and so good, and why it's probably safe to assume that Nol is never going to go as far as Yui did because he has things that she doesn't. He has people who care about him and people who he cares about, He has that humanity that is going to anchor him, and that sense is not just a sense of humanity but like his sense of ethics and morals, that like if he starts to veer towards a point where he's trying to justify things where even he would be able to be like, is this who I am? But even if he's trying to justify it, he's got the people who can stop it. Yui never had that, and that is a really unfortunate thing, is that support systems are incredibly important. And very often, people who need support systems the most are the ones who get abandoned. And then people are like, oh gosh, it's so bad what happened with Helen. Yeah, can you believe that she turned out like that? It's like, gee, I wonder why.
Yeah, and it's like you said, like it's people are very uncomfortable by seeing the humanity in Yui because it just really illuminates how like anyone could end up there. Like you said, like Noel is going through a lot of similarities to what Yui likely experienced when she was younger and going to make similar choices, but the difference is that there's things in his life, in his environment that will likely rein him back in. Whereas Yui is someone who was faced with a lot of obstacles and trauma and being put down and having to constantly strive and prove herself and earn things through roundabout means, and nothing was ever there to rein her in. And so she kept going and eventually reached that, like crossed that line, but she didn't just cross it just because.
Right. Like she had a lot of justified reasoning that compelled her. And it's just unfortunate that there was nothing and no one who could have, like helped hold her back.
That she wasn't presented any opportunity. Well, that she wasn't presented anything in her life that did that. That nothing seemingly really tried.
Right. Yeah. And now she has ruined countless lives and counting.
Yay!
Yay!
Yay! And with that, I think we have concluded the Yui episode.
For those who are listening, you don't know it because this is going to be edited, but we've been at this for all 4 hours. So I want to give a special shout out to everybody who has sat with us for this entire time. Yay!
Oh god.
And to those who are listening on YouTube or Spotify, you can always join us on the Discord every other Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And maybe not necessarily for an entire 4 hours, but you can join us on Discord and hang out in the chat with us. There's usually cat gifts. We like to talk a lot. Sometimes we get sidetracked. We try not to. We edit that out for you guys. But if you want to be privy to all of the things that get edited out, you can come join us.
It's fun in here to Everyone who made it this far, y'all are the real MVP.
Honestly, I don't want to think about how many hours you have sat through, but honestly, shout out to you guys.